calling the meeting to order at 6:30. Let me pull out my agenda here. Announcements. Do we have any announcements? Okay. Public appearances, and this would be for anybody who wishes to speak on an item that is not on the agenda. Public, okay. Commissioner comments. We want to talk about what's happening at our labs real quickly. Tom, you want to start?
I guess the only significant thing I have is I'm hopeful we have a youth member of the Library Advisory Board. The reason I say I hope is because this is the fourth one, and if he shows up at the next meeting, and he promises he will, then we will have a youth member. But we've gone through a number of people who have said yes and then didn't happen. We had a nice book sale 2 weeks ago. Don't know exactly how much we made yet, but it was very, very well attended.
Okay.
So I do know our book sale was just over 10,000.
Wow.
Very good. That's your friend?
Yeah.
And what's happening with your lab?
We have a meeting in 2 weeks, usual stuff.
Okay. Tim?
Let's see, our lab hasn't met. We meet in January again. The only other thing is we're having a volunteer lunch this week, which is a tradition in Petaluma. And there was a book sale, but I have no idea what the results were. And we are also having a special workshop on how to choose which device to read your ebooks on.
Okay.
That's December 8th at 2 o'clock.
Just in time for Christmas.
Yes.
Susan?
The Cloverdale lab met on November 13th, and there was, on their agenda, they discussed the library staff report on the change of hours, and there was some good discussion regarding the Monday closures, and there was discussion about the role that the library plays in Cloverdale, specifically with the younger people. The high school library has been closed for 3 years in Cloverdale, so they really are the only game in town. There was the discussion about the students in their junior year do a major term paper, research paper, and they're very dependent on the library there. So there was just a lot of discussion of the impact of the library, which may be even greater than in a community that has other resources. They were very happy to hear that their library will be open between Christmas and New Year's, and there's a close relationship there between the library and the schools, and so that information was being shared with the schools there. The branch manager was speaking to the local Rotary Club, and friends reported that for the last year, the book sales had generated $2,200, but they have an ongoing book cart that generates about $500 a month from that sale.
Thank you. Helena?
So my report's a little long. I'll try to speed it up a little bit. In Sebastopol, the friends talked about, both met last month. Sebastopol meets every month, and Guerneville has just started to meet every other month. So they both met last month. Sue Fujita, who's the Friends president, talked about how Sebastopol had sponsored the annual Friends get-together, which was down in Petaluma, and that the Friends groups from the system gathered and discussed different ideas on fundraising and other things. The next book sale for Sebastopol, which will be mostly children's books, will take place December 7th and 8th, and then the next full book sale will be in January, January 9th through 10th, I believe. There is a landscape committee for the Sebastopol Library, which is composed of community members and Sarah Gurney, who is on the city council. And they have some different design ideas. Design ideas are being mapped for 4 different landscape zones around the library and the City Hall complex. Initially, they weren't going to include City Hall, but the consensus was that it would be a good idea if it was all similar, since it's all in the same complex. There's going to be a focus on permaculture, and master gardeners and other organizations are contributing to the planning. And hopefully that plan will include fundraising for long-term fiscal sustainability for the maintenance of the landscaping. The Sebastopol lab is working on a draft lab handbook. And I wanted to suggest, because I know there was a previous library handbook, and although it could be out of date, it might be helpful if they could take a look at that to add to their handbook.
Is there one?
There are lab guidelines that are way outdated and have some inaccurate bits of information in them.
But it might be still a good guide, so they don't have to completely reinvent the wheel. And
Well, it deals with all the support groups and not just the labs. I think I gave you a copy, didn't I?
you did, and I actually thought it had some really good stuff in it. So it would be great if they could at least see the lab part of it.
Okay, well, maybe what I'll do is, Keo and I'll take a look at it and identify, maybe find a way to identify the areas that are misstatements of policy and procedure and things like that.
Because it did have some really good concrete information, I thought. So
Okay.
that would be helpful to them. They're still working on it.
And are they willing to share it with other labs when it's complete?
They would be delighted to. So they might actually be finished with a pretty good copy, especially with this input by the annual meeting, and that might be helpful. There was some discussion in Sebastopol about hosting a community forum similar to what Guerneville had done. So they're going to continue to talk about that. They will be working with the public to try to define what that is. It could be come and meet our new branch manager, Matthew Rose, and incorporate some public feedback on different things. So both Guerneville and Sebastopol now have 1 vacancy each on their library advisory boards. We just had a resignation in Guerneville. So both of the labs have received copies of the JPA white paper and the library's reduction on hours. And there'll be further discussion at Sebastopol. They meet Wednesday, this coming Wednesday. Guerneville had quite a bit of discussion about it, and I'll just segue over to that right now. And that's that they were concerned about the impact on the public when the library is closed for 3 days to accommodate a Monday holiday. Staff in Guerneville have to deal with a lot of book return, and it takes 2 staff members to clear it up. The change in service hours has had another impact on public service staff since the elimination of the substitutes. So there was a suggestion by one of the library advisory board members about rovers to be used to cover absences, and we can talk about that in further detail.
We actually have looked at that, just for your information. The pattern of absences doesn't lend itself to having rovers, because we've looked at that, because it's come up with the union too. It just doesn't quite work, because you'll have no absences and then you'll have a glut of absences, and the rovers are either not being used or can't fill all the vacancies. And then you're paying salary and benefits to those rovers, which is why getting back to having a little more money for substitutes, we believe is the best solution.
Well, it was a good discussion, and it was discussed a couple of different ways as to having people, at least having people trained and to be on call and not be paid, but then that would be a little bit different from having a fully paid person who's not working. We talked about those issues and how they could be used when they weren't covering absences. So when the commission talks about that further, I can also give forth those ideas. Let's see. You know that the community forum happened in September. One of the ideas was a teen room when they do this remodel in some point in the future. And some members of the community at that meeting expressed not unhappiness, but that the teen room might not be the best idea, that they've seen that situation happen other places and it perhaps wasn't utilized the way we might envision it would be utilized. So there was a subcommittee meeting on the teen room, and that took place November 14th. And so they decided that it might be more appropriate to raise funds for a remodeled library, focusing on the library as a community center and not solely as a teen room.
Actually, the plans we have open up the community room to Armstrong Woods Road and do some things that would strengthen it as a community center too.
Yeah, so that was, there is a subcommittee from the community, the Friends, and the library. So I think they're going to be, and they have some involvement from the teens. The youth member on Guerneville's Library Advisory Board is, she seems to be very active in her school, and so she's able to do surveys with other
Great.
students there and get other. She goes to El Molino.
I think what's been so nice in Sonoma with their teen room is it's really been used by the teens. It's become a gathering place after school and on Saturdays and things like that.
Yeah, that's great. So, but it might not be appropriate for every community that way. But anyway, so
It's
they're
Mari's
talking about it.
dream.
And I think, I should mention that in March, there is going to be the big read, and it will be the poems of Emily Dickinson. And they received a National Endowment of the Arts grant for that.
Actually, it's a county-wide thing.
Yeah, but I think I'm mentioning it because Peter Andrews is instrumental. He's a member of the Friends and a member of the Lab, and he's been instrumental in getting that. So that seems like a very exciting.
Yeah, all our libraries will be actively participating. And
That's-
David is our liaison to the planning committee.
Uh-huh. So they were talking about some great functions up there. Anyway, I think that's it. Thanks.
So the Santa Rosa Lab met on November 14th, and they are considering changing the meeting date of the lab to be closer to the commission meeting. I'm not sure why, but that discussion had come up. They were interested in meeting closer in time, I guess, thinking that maybe more people would come to the commission meeting or things wouldn't get lost in the interim. Not much else went on there. They had copies of the, did they have the white paper as well as, they had, yeah, the JPA white
Oh,
paper?
I don't know. I don't remember if they had the JPA.
And the Monday closure report, and, but there was very little discussion. The group wasn't very engaged, I have to say. It was, they had their elections, and it was a chore finding somebody who was willing, Barbara was willing to be president again, which was good, because nobody else seemed to be interested or stepping forward. I am concerned that I'm not sure how to energize the Santa Rosa Lab, and I think they could use a little spark somewhere.
Who did they elect as vice chair?
Isn't it David?
Was it David Carr?
Who agreed to do it with the understanding that he doesn't have to do anything. So there's not really a whole lot to report out from the Santa Rosa Lab. We do have a new youth member who I was very impressed with, and she showed up and she was engaged and chatted and participated, and I think that's helpful and hopefully heading in a different direction.
I have one more thing to add, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
And that's about the reduction in hours. I'm sorry, I skipped over to Guerneville, and I had wanted to add that there, overall, I think, and there will be more discussion in the Sebastopol lab about the reduction in hours and the JPA paper. But overall, I think both library advisory boards felt that there could have been more to the paper. They had some suggestions for what could be added, but they would like to see the discussion happen with the commission and what the commission plans to do, if anything, to reinstate the Monday hours. So I wanted to add that. And about the JPA, I left this out too. At least one Sebastopol Lab member has provided written input to be given to the JPA review committee, and she had some good suggestions. So
Oh, good.
she passes on to Sarah Gurney. So I'm
Okay.
not sure how Sarah's going to handle that.
Okay, yeah, I'm not quite sure what the flow of getting information out to all the
Yeah.
committee members is yet, so we'll have to see what that is. Okay, thank you very much. Now we move on to this
I
special.
just have one, I made a mistake. The workshop on ebooks is at 11 a.m. on the 8th.
Okay,
I hate to
everyone,
have-
change your calendars.
I don't want people to rush in at 2 o'clock and be disappointed.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to special discussion items, and the first one is the annual audit review and discussion. We have our auditor here, Will Soper. And there should be a draft discussion. How do we want to handle this? Do we want to start with, you want to just take us through the highlights and then field questions from the commission?
Sure, that's fine. Yeah, I've identified the pages that I kind of want to make sure that we hit on, and
Okay.
then if I miss something that's important to the group, then interrupt me, or we can hit it at the end, either way.
Okay.
I'd like to start with pages 3 and 4. And we hit on this every year, but I think it's important to revisit. Pages 3 and 4 are drastically different than pages 5 and 6, because pages 3 and 4 include your liability for OPEB, your other post-employment benefits, whereas pages 5 and 6 don't include that liability of $4.8 million. So we're going to look at pages 3 and 4 first, and then I'll take you over to pages 5 and 6, and we'll understand some of those differences. On page 3, your statement of net assets, I'd like to point out that in the capital assets section, while there was substantial improvement to facilities during the 11-12 fiscal year, there are some financial assets in there that are not being depreciated yet for some costs that were incurred over time at the Petaluma and Guerneville branches, basically some architectural studies that just weren't put into service yet because the actual physical work hasn't commenced and the construction hasn't happened. But there's still some value in the studies that were done, and so there's roughly, between Petaluma and Guerneville combined, about $61,000 of cost that is in that buildings and improvements number for basically the cost of studies where construction hasn't been performed yet.
I think I asked you this last year, but I can't remember the answer. What land do we own?
Right back here, we
Oh, we
own,
own the annex.
we own the annex. That's the only piece of land that we own.
I keep forgetting that. Okay, thank you.
And are most of that 2.7 million is tenant improvements and interiors of the various buildings which we don't own, but they're
That's
the
correct.
improvements that we've done?
That's correct.
But it goes back, I mean,
Well, it goes back to 2004, when
Right.
GASB 34 was implemented. You were required to have a study done to determine what the historical cost of assets were. And then from there forward, it's been kept track on an inventory type basis, where as you purchase something, a ledger's been kept. I guess while we're talking about fixed assets, and I've had this conversation with management, I think it's important for you to look at some sort of fixed asset software management system. They're not very expensive, but currently all of your fixed assets, buildings, all the way down to smaller items like computers, are tracked by branch, and the cost basis and depreciation is all tracked manually in Excel. And so you have this giant Excel workbook for millions of dollars worth of assets, and we all know that using Excel is very error-ridden. So I think you're at the point where, both from just a tracking from an inventory perspective and being able to number items, and then actually being able to calculate depreciation correctly, reduce your error, and reduce the staff workload of managing this giant Excel file, that it's probably time to invest in some fixed
I
asset
think that that
software.
was one of the components that we identified as being highly desirable in a new financial management system.
Yeah, I mean, really, the cost of the software versus the staff time to maintain
Yeah.
that workbook, you recover it in the first year.
And I think Sandy just answered the question, but we've been having discussions about new financial management software. That's something that would ordinarily be
It's
encompassed
not-
in it, or would be separate?
No, it's typically not
It's-
inherent in the GL software, but.
Well, but
I mean,
it
could
is
be a
as a
module that you add on.
module that you add on in most of the packages that are available, because we're looking at way beyond just the GL.
So, but it wouldn't make sense for us to consider a standalone product if we're considering new financial software at this point?
I don't know, I mean, I think even if you were considering the implementation timeframe for new financial software versus the cost of fixed asset software, you could easily recoup the cost of fixed asset software in 1 year, even if you move to a new GL in 2.
Okay.
What's your idea of not expensive?
Like $1,000 to $1,200.
Oh,
I just want, I mean.
And most fixed asset software is geared towards the tax side of things, where you have to annually update it because of tax law changes. You don't need to update yours for tax law changes.
So if we were to get a fixed asset system
Mhm.
now and then a other kind of financial management system later, the two could be
You would be able to,
compatible?
you could probably, I mean, you could either keep them separate or integrate them. Most all fixed asset software has the ability to transfer assets into Excel so that you can export them into other software programs. So if you used fixed asset software temporarily and decided to add it to your new GL system if the feature is available, you could certainly import it at that time and then abandon the software. But, I mean, the time savings internally in the
General
budget
ledger.
and finance office would be huge.
GL is general ledger.
Oh, sorry, general, yes.
thank you. Okay, thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's fine.
Continue.
The other areas of the balance sheet that I think are important for you to understand are down in the liability section, your liability for compensated absences, which is basically the library's liability to its employment base for accrued vacation, personal time, sick time, has grown to $865,000. It grew by about $51,000 just in the 11-12 fiscal year. We're noticing a trend of employees, the employee base earning more hours than they're using in any 1 year. That liability has tended to grow each year. The $51,000 of growth is probably more growth than we've seen in any 1 year in quite a while. So I would caution you to, I guess, find ways to either allow employees to take time off if there's just not the ability for them to take it, or encourage them to take time off. It's a rather large liability. And from an internal control perspective, especially people who are in management or involved in higher level decisions, we like to see them actually take time off from an internal control perspective, because it's good to have someone else visit that role from time to time.
Do we have that rule here? In banking, we often do, where you have to at least take a week off concurrent. And, for a financial institution, there's reasons why you do that.
We don't have a rule in terms of having to take a week off, a solid week off, no. We have such generous vacation that as I think you've seen in one of the other documents for later in the meeting, that people just have trouble taking all their vacation.
Is there a use it or lose it
No.
policy?
Is
There-
it legal in California?
Yeah, you do have a cap on the payout of it. So for example, vacation, once someone hits 240 hours of vacation, they stop accruing it and they wouldn't get paid out over and above it. And you do have, off the top of my head, I want to say about 8 employees who at one level or another are at their caps. And I think too, it's important that there's systems in place so that you can monitor, sorry, there's a fly over here.
Yeah,
You can-
it's sharing its time with all of us.
You can monitor that they're drawing from the right bucket of hours when they're taking that time off, because there are different payouts for each of those levels as well.
Okay.
But it's a large liability that will eventually have to be paid out in dollars. Two, that compensated absence liability could be broken out between short and long-term. Historically, we've always classified your liability as long-term because your employment base doesn't tend to eat into the liability, right? They earn it and use it, earn it and use it, earn it and use it, and your liability tends to kind of grow in a small amount from year to year or stay stagnant. So in a year where you have, maybe a large number of retirees or a retiree incentive program, you might actually consider classifying part of that liability as current because a bulk amount is going to be paid out in the next 12 months.
So just real quickly, what happens to it at retirement? Does it completely get paid out or what?
Yes. There are, you could probably speak to it better, Sandy. The vacation and the personal time gets paid out. The sick time gets paid out at a rate of no more than 25% of the balance, but there are certain employee groups that are eligible to convert that into PERS credit as well, which you ultimately end up paying for through PERS contribution, and I'm not certain exactly who or what those groups are.
Well, it's anybody who's in CalPERS who has sufficient sick leave time can convert that to airtime for CalPERS.
The conversion is definitely more beneficial than the 25% payout.
Right. But I'm looking at Patrick to see if he has anything to add on this issue.
No, again, for sick time, if you're eligible for CalPERS retirement, you convert 100% of that to service credit for CalPERS. Otherwise, it's a 25% cash out, maximum $500.
Thank you.
But 500 hours is the max accrual, so 25% of the 500 hours is what the library's financial payout would be. And then the last liability on there is your net obligation for your post-employment benefits, which is basically your retiree health care that you're currently on a pay-as-you-go basis, but you do have an actuarial liability accruing each year to eventually, over 30 years, get that plan fully funded. That liability is $4.8 million as of June 30, 2012, based on the most recent actuarial study. That liability grew by about $810,000 in the 11-12 fiscal year.
So are you going to talk about it more on page 22, or should we ask our questions about it now?
We could pull page 22 out and talk about them concurrently.
Okay, because I have questions.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was trying to understand, if I understood it, and is our annual required contribution was 1.2 million?
Yes.
A little over. But the actual contribution we made was 532,000, so we had a net, increase in our obligation of 810.
Yes.
And I was trying to understand, what does that mean when it says annual required contribution, and how is it then that if we have a pay-as-you-go, it feels like we're not actually paying
Sure.
as you go, we have a going
Sure.
backwards?
So the annual required contribution, I don't want to step on the actuary because the actuary actually determines that number based on several factors: your employment base, the age of your employment base, the retirement benefits that you offer your employment base, and the cost of healthcare in your organization. They factor in anticipated rates of return, but basically what they try to do based on your current employment base, it's not based on future hiring or anticipated levels of hiring, but for your current employment base, what is the cost of providing healthcare for that employment base into retirement? And so when the actuarial study was performed, they determined what the total cost of that retirement benefit is for your existing workforce, and then amortize it over 30 years. 30 years is the maximum period of time that the Governmental Accounting Standards Board allows you to amortize that liability over. Other organizations have chosen shorter lives, issued bonds, saved for funding it. But 30 years is the max period you're allowed to recognize the liability over. And because you're currently on pay-as-you-go, which means you really just pay the dollars that are necessary to keep those retirees covered, You're not saving any money for your existing workforce, you're only paying for your existing retirees.
Okay, so you're not actually paying the increasing obligation, you're
No.
just paying the kind of, it's like a cash basis.
You're paying for the people who already
Right,
retired.
right.
You're not
Paying for your
paying
future
for your
obligation increasing
future
each year.
obligation, exactly.
Okay,
And
And-
so the 1.275 is
right.
your obligation for your existing workforce and current retirees.
Then what does the 13.4 on page 23 represent?
The 13.4 on, oh, sorry, get back there. 13.4 on page 23 that's your total, that's what's being amortized over 30 years. The 13.4 million is the total cost of retirement benefits for your existing workforce and current retirees.
For the next 30 years.
That's, right, the
Okay,
13,
so-
And that amount went down.
slightly.
So if-
It was just a little over 14 million before.
If we did pay-as-you-go for another 25 years, at the end of it, we would have like
You're
a
gonna have a-
13 million balloon payment kind of
Yes, you
thing.
will. Well,
Well, no, you'll be
Not
paying it
below.
all along.
honestly,
paying
your
it all.
fund balance will be so upside down at the
Right.
end of 30 years, I don't know that you'll be,
We'll be paying, but at the end of 30 years, this is what we're going to be paying, so if we don't start setting it aside now,
Well, over 30 years, right, Will? In other words, that's the amount over the
no,
next
I mean,
30.
the thing is, no, but if you don't, your pay-as-you-go payment will be 3 times what it is now.
right, okay.
Because you'll have X number of retirees, you'll have triple the number of retirees, and you'll still have a current workforce.
Right.
And so the payment for your retirees will be 1.5 million on
Okay.
pay-as-you-go, and you still won't be funding for your existing workforce.
Right,
And it's cheaper to go ahead and start funding it now or putting aside money and earning interest on it than it
Well,
is
I
to-
mean, part of it is, yeah, the assumed interest, I don't have your actuarial study with me, but your assumed interest rates in the actuarial study are moderate. I mean, they're not super high interest rates. If you were saving for it now, you could potentially be out earning.
right, okay.
On the note of saving for it now, I think it's important to notice back on page 3 that your unrestricted fund balance at the end of June 30, 2012 is 2.9, call it 3 million. And that includes not only your general fund, but it includes the fund balance of all of your special revenue funds as well. If you continue to accrue a liability at the rate of $800,000 a year in this unfunded obligation, in 3.5 years, your fund balance is negative.
Right.
Say that again.
If you're accruing, basically the piece of your healthcare benefit obligation that you are not paying, that you're not saving for, is about $800,000 a year. Your fund balance right now is $3 million, which includes all of your special revenue funds as well. In less than 4 years, just with that liability hitting you every single year and going unfunded, that fund balance will go negative at the end of 4 years.
Right. Except we're starting at 4.8.
That 4.8 is already in there, though.
Ex-
Yeah,
Right,
the 4.8 is already out of your $3 million fund balance that's left,
okay.
right? 'Cause
Right,
it's
right,
included
right.
in your total
Got it.
liabilities,
Okay, so that's already subtracted out.
Right.
Okay,
which leaves you with 2.984 in your unrestricted fund balance.
got it.
Of that 2.9, let's see, 1.5,
Yeah.
2.5. I
And-
mean, it's pretty much all
And-
special revenue fund.
And then is that 1.2, that's what it was, the annual contribution for this year, but that's anticipated to go up each year, right? We saw a different report.
The 1.2, honestly, until you make a drastic change in your OPEB plan, I don't think that that's really going to change
Okay.
much. I know you went through the process of making some changes in the last 18 months. but it really didn't have the effect on the liability. That $13 million liability was just a little bit over 14 before. It didn't have as big of an effect as I think everyone thought it was going to have.
And the change, was that the benchmarking to Kaiser
Yes.
change? Okay.
Because the only way for that number to really change is to change your plan for the existing employment base. To change it for the future employment base doesn't really change your existing liability.
Right.
And we really cannot change it under California
Right.
law.
So, I mean, I think you really have to look seriously at funding it. I don't think it's a number that's going to change, you know, you can't sit around and wait for it to change drastically,
Okay, so we have to
because I just
assume
don't think that it's,
that's about what it will be going forward.
I think that's a safe assumption, yes.
So, where it says the net obligation at the beginning of the year,
Mhm.
on page 22, 4 million,
Mm-hmm.
is that what we really, I mean, there's a required contribution, but there's a net obligation, and really we should be...
The net obligation was your liability as of July 1st, July 1st, 2011. So that's what had been accumulating, and that liability is going to continue to follow you. For example, if you only contribute $800,000 in the 12-13 fiscal year, you're still going to have the $4.8 million liability sitting there because $800,000 is your required contribution for this year.
Versus the 500,000 that we did.
Well, I'm assuming that piece you're still paying. You wouldn't be able to.
Fly.
Oh.
No.
Yeah, so when you're talking about the obligation, you're talking about to save beyond the pay-as-you-go.
At this point, you're 4.8 million in the hole
Right.
against your obligation and
Right.
still not looking at funding anything between the 500,000 and 1.2 million.
Right.
And the 500,000 is what we actually paid out this past year.
Yeah, I mean, that piece you can't not pay or your
Right.
retirees wouldn't have health care.
And we'd be in trouble legally.
Yes.
Has anybody figured out a way to explain this to the average person, that they can understand that this is a significant obligation that
I mean,
needs
it's
to be dealt with?
basically the same as, it's sort of the same as your employer promising you that you'll have $5,000 a month at retirement, and you work there for 30 years, yet they never saved any of the money that they promised they were going to pay you at retirement.
Isn't that what the county did? And a couple of years ago, they ended up issuing a bond so they could pay for their
But I
employee
think in
retirement.
your situation, if you look at waiting for a bond issuance or something, you know, a little more elaborate like that, if you wait 4 more years, your fund balance will be negative, and who's going to want to lend?
Right, right.
Actually, I think, yeah, go ahead.
So, from your point of view, what is the figure we should be paying each year? And should we be saving it or paying it? Seems like we should be paying it,
Well,
not
it's
just
the
saving
same
it.
difference, really. Once you start to fund it, it goes into trust. So you can't just sort of put it aside on the library's financial statements. I mean, this is really it is the employee's money and benefit. And so the minute you decide to start doing something other than pay the minimum benefit, pay as you go, you're required to put that into trust, yes.
But we can decide how much we're going to put into trust
Yes.
each year. So if our budget is such that we can't do the 1.2 million, I mean, the entire amount, but we can do some above and beyond the pay-as-you-go, then you would encourage us to at
Yes.
least start doing that.
Yes.
But we would,
should definitely shoot for the 1.3 million a year, 1.2758.
Or a plan of maybe, you know, a 3 to 5 year plan to get to that. But I think you've got to just start doing something because you're quickly going to be upside down.
So every year that we don't do at least the 1, 2, or 1, 3, we're going negative more, you know?
Yes.
But that money has to come somewhere, so that's a significant, for lack of a better term, cut in operating expenses, right? Isn't that, I mean,
It's got to
If we
come from
decide,
somewhere.
if we decide to pay $1.2 million a year into this fund, that's 1.2, well, 800,000 a year that we don't have for other things, right?
But we can look more closely at the special revenue funds and see how they could be used. I don't know if that
Most of
list
them
has
are
been
designated.
finished.
Yes. It
I
was
don't think we've
distributed-
seen it.
No, it was distributed last
But I
month
thought
or
you
the
said
month
that they
before.
still had to do more work on it.
I think you would have, I mean, for
We
the
have
biggest
very
pieces
little
of the
that's
special
not
revenue funds,
designated.
for the Hopkins and the Cromwell, I think you'd have a difficult time substantiating that based on the language in the gift.
And almost all of the gifts have designations associated with them, although they don't have quite the strength of the Cromwell and the Hopkins.
Well, I think your challenge too is that even if the gift is maybe loosely written as to what it could be used for, many of them are specific maybe to the branch. And then
Right.
so how do you support using that
Right.
for funding a trust for the entire employment base? I don't know that you could support that.
So the only place basically that it can come from is the
Likely.
operating. ex-
That doesn't mean that you couldn't re-look at using special revenue funds for areas of operations other than funding a trust.
And then use money
that we're Yes. not
using for that
Yes.
fund the trust.
That's $800,000 more, that's a lot of.
Yeah,
Special.
it is. But
And other, generally across the spectrum of public service, public entities, agencies, people are doing bonds, people are budgeting out of their operating expense, people are doing pay-as-you-go. Are there other alternatives that people are using that you know
I mean,
of?
there's people doing hybrid methods too of just funding what their budget currently allows them to fund as well.
is this the issue that was with the post office and Congress decided they just had to pay it all up front and that's why,
I'm not sure.
okay. No? Okay.
We could set up the trust, though, and say, okay, for this year, we can put in this amount because we've got to start doing something. But that doesn't necessarily lock us into a reoccurring amount every year.
Correct.
We could say, oh, next year,
The thing is, if
we
you,
can do
if you
more or
make, if you
less.
start making sporadic type payments each year, it is going to cause you to probably have to have an actuarial study done each year.
So it's better to say,
So, but they're not-
here's a set amount we can
I've-
commit to?
I don't think the actuarial studies are cost prohibitive. If I remember correct. Sandy, do you remember how much off the top of your head?
No, I mean, they're not outrageously expensive.
Yeah.
There's several thousand, maybe 3,000 to 4,000.
I want to say 3 was my memory.
Yeah,
but-
that's what,
On the other hand, if that's an annual expense, I mean, why
No,
incur it if
absolutely,
we
but
don't
I mean,
have
if
to?
it causes you to,
Right,
I guess, overspend in some other area where you're borrowing money or I don't
Right.
know, not making repairs that you should, then
Okay, I don't know whether I can ask that question or
Thank you.
So, any other questions on page 3? On page 4, I guess I'd like to point out, page 4 is your statement of activities, income and expenses, which includes 2 items that you don't ordinarily look at as part of the budget process, and one is your $810,000 current year expense for that piece of the liability we just talked about that you're not funding. And so that $810,000 is included in personnel expense on line 1. And then several lines just below that is depreciation of $283,000. So between the $810,000 of OPEB obligation that was unfunded and the $283,000 of depreciation, if you were to pull those 2 items out of this picture, you actually would not have a decrease in net assets. Those 2 items are the biggest contributors to your decrease in net assets of $537,000. Right here. So adding those 2 non-cash type items back in, you can see that you would not have had a decrease in net assets.
And the 342,000 in the intergovernmental fund, are we losing that next year?
We've already lost it. That was just a little bleed over from,
when the state cut everything
now
off.
that is more than just that state grant money. Some of it's literacy. I need to look.
Okay.
There are other things in there.
So we might still get a small piece of it next year if they continue the literacy?
Right.
But probably not. Okay.
There is some money from the county in there. So we'll have some of it, but not the extent. I've got the end of the year report, the unaudited. We got 149,000 in transaction-based reimbursements at the beginning of last fiscal year, which we will not get this year.
And that was the part of the state funding that got completely taken out of the budget.
That got, that got shot with the trigger when they pulled the trigger.
They pulled the trigger at the cliff edge.
Okay, so pages 5 and, any questions on page 4? Is that- Pages 5 and 6 are probably a little more familiar to look at because those are the financial statements that don't include depreciation or your OPEB obligation. In looking at the balance sheet on page 5, the area that I wanted to talk about on here, and we talked about it last year, is that it's really important for some gift acceptance policies to get addressed for a couple of reasons. One, now that you're required to expand the disclosure of your fund balance and whether it's unassigned, assigned, committed, in the absence of really strong gift acceptance policies and systems to track the gifts and the donor's wishes and how it's spent, it makes it really difficult for an organization of your size to comply with the complexities of the financial reporting process and the disclosure process and making sure that you have tracked and spent the money in accordance with the donor's wishes. It also makes it difficult to accept gifts in the absence of a policy because there might be certain things that you don't want to accept or that you need to have a policy around accepting if you inherit stock or a house or something other than cash, that you need to have a formal policy of how you're going to handle and accept those gifts and transact them in the future.
This was something that was is on the priority list that was in Elise's work plan that was supposed to be done.
Is there specialized software that handles gift acceptance?
Not really, no.
People just use Excel and sort of
Use Excel.
manage it that way?
I mean, you have the ability, if you were to get another really large gift, to set up another fund inside of your general ledger for it and track it that way as well. It's more so in the gifts and donations fund that you have probably the biggest area of opportunity to improve, where you've got multiple, branches, donations coming into there, where, even though it may not be a $5,000 gift that is required to be endowed may not be material to the financial statements if $5,000 isn't endowed as restricted on here, but it is important to be organizationally to make sure you spend that in accordance with the donor's wishes. The absence of a gift acceptance policy might also create burden for you to track a gift that comes in that's required to be endowed for $1,000 because maybe administratively it might not be worth it to accept that gift and track $1,000 for perpetuity. So there's probably a big opportunity for policy and an education process around gift acceptance.
Right, and also a review of all our existing gifts to make sure that we have the appropriate paperwork and policies set for them.
So, I mean, last year's audit, as part of the required disclosures and the expansion of it, we went back and pulled out really old documents on the Cromwell and Hopkins funds to make sure that we had those in the right buckets. But the gifts and donations fund definitely has opportunity because there's so much, so many smaller dollars in there. The other area of opportunity I think you have on page 5 is some further review around the fund balance for capital improvements. one of the discussion items is to maybe engage or look at or spend some time around a capital improvement study so that you have some
Yeah.
concrete support for substantiating that number. And it probably needs to be broken up into looking at facilities separately from things like vehicles and IT and stuff that has shorter lives. But some basis and some study and some thought around a replacement cycle and a cost cycle for those types of items, I think is important for you to have.
I agree.
Are all these suggestions basically only coming to us in this format, or do you write them
No,
out?
I'll be writing, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yes.
Just because?
I mean, before you put them in paper and delivered, I think it's
Right.
important to discuss them
Okay.
first.
No, that's fine, I just,
That's part of the cleanup that needs to be done with the fund balance,
right.
is to have an explicit capital improvements and capital asset maintenance plan.
Page 6 and 26, I'd like to look at it at the same time. Oh, you're stapled. Here, you can share mine with me.
Got an extra if you need mine.
So page 6 is your statement of revenue and expenditures for the governmental funds, which again does not include depreciation and does not include your other post-employment benefit liability expense. And page 26 is the budget versus actual of the general fund. In the bottom section of page 6 there, I want to point out that the other financing sources are not necessarily outside financing sources or somebody else contributing money to the library. It's basically the budgeted shift of money from the special revenue funds to the general fund to help pay for a portion of the capital outlay that was made during 11-12. So that's not external money coming in. The page 26 shows your budget versus actual. And I think what I wanted to point out on there was that in light of all the activity going on last year and the outlay for capital improvements, the group did a good job controlling expenditure. I mean, expenditures were actually nearly $400,000 less than what you had budgeted to spend last year. And the areas that were actually improved in terms of budget versus actual expenditures were in salaries and benefits, and in other operating expenditures, which were somewhat general in nature, but utilities, repairs and maintenance, and areas like that. Any questions about that? No?
So, okay, I'm sorry, just really, you've already said this, and I just want to make sure I understand. So this expenditures was the capital improvements?
These expenditures right here were your
Capital outlay,
capital
okay.
outlay improvements.
Okay.
But in total, and
Because,
I'm looking at the middle of the page here. In total, you had budgeted roughly $16.5 million in expenditures. And your actual expenditures were just 16.1 million.
and that's basically really didn't have anything to do with the capital improvement stuff, because
No, it did not.
It had to do with salaries, like salary savings. and-
Salary savings and operating cost
And
savings.
operating cost savings.
Yes.
And because the two libraries were closed, the operating costs were less, or the operating costs overall from other places?
I don't think that you can say that we saw great savings from closing Sebastopol. When we didn't close Sonoma, they were simply in a temporary quarter. So I'm not sure we can assign those savings to that.
Yeah, so it's just overall system.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's,
savings,
I mean,
okay.
because definitely the cost of closure, really, because, and even the moving costs and the rent costs,
Mm-hmm.
are included in that capital outlay expenditure. So it wasn't in that area that you received the benefit.
Right, because I thought we went over in those areas, but.
Could you speak a little louder?
That's true, because I was asking, because I thought we went over in the capital outlay expenditures, and so that's why I asked, so thanks.
Let's see. The next page I want to flip to is page 19.
Can I just ask one more question
Sure.
on page 26? So, am I understanding correctly then, we had originally budgeted to use almost 1.6 of taking it away from the fund balance, but in the end, we had kind of a positive variance of 900,000 and only ended up taking the 682, is that right?
That is correct.
So we still had to pull from our fund balance, but not to the extent that we'd originally anticipated.
Correct.
And most of that was the capital
Capital outlay.
expenditures. We didn't have to use fund balance for operating expenditures.
And Sandy, you can probably answer this one up on the top, where it's almost 94 million less than we thought we would collect in fines, fees, and services. Was that
Right.
driven because of branch closures, or?
Partially,
94,000, just.
I'm
since
sorry,
we're being
94,000.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Just since we're being
94,000.
recorded.
Different.
partially, but also just fines and fees came in lower.
Okay.
I think that's also indicative of the times we're in.
Yeah.
Those are more difficult to collect right now, and that's, I think, in any industry, private or public.
Yeah. That's true.
We'll talk about that some more in a little bit.
So page 19 is your summary of capital assets. And again, I think, just to point out that even though on the balance sheet, we're looking at the depreciated basis of your assets, you do have over $6 million worth of assets that are being tracked manually in Excel. So know that it's like, that Excel file is voluminous.
Sounds like a software salesman to me.
And then anything else, the last page that I wanted to hit on was page 22, which we talked about in depth already, which is your OPEB obligation. So I don't know if anybody else had anything on that page. Or in,
There's something on page 21.
oh, sure.
About the fourth line down, paren A, 7.75% investment rate of return assumptions. That's a PERS assumption?
Those are all, everything in that paragraph is a PERS actuarial assumption that the library doesn't really have any control over.
Okay, and is that what in other places I would call a discount rate?
That's their expected investment rate of return over time.
Okay, let me ask the question a different way. Their expected investment rate of return affects how much we are required to?
That's correct.
Okay. Have they, any time in the last 10 years, made 7.75%?
Honestly, I have no idea.
Okay. If 10 years from now, they fess up and say, oops, we were really only making 2% for the last 10 years, how does that affect the library? Do we then have to come up with $10 million to fund these retirement benefits?
Don't they
Yes.
increase our annual contribution?
Exactly.
Yeah,
So you have
Yeah.
to pay it over time.
Okay, I think the
There's
only
a- I
point
mean,
I'm
there's
trying to make is
no-
that I don't think that's realistic. I think we have a greater obligation than is expressed here.
Right, if you look down at the bottom of that page, you can see that we're already seeing some increase in our contributions as a result of the shortfalls in their assets.
I think it is somewhere between possible and likely that they will be forced to restate this, and it will have a material effect on us.
I agree.
I don't disagree with you, but I think it'll have a direct effect in your contribution rate, not some giant down payment.
Okay.
Right. But
I mean,
It'll still hurt.
If you look, well, I mean, it's already hurting. I mean, your contribution rates have more than doubled, just
Right.
probably in the last, I'm speaking off the top of my head, but I would say 5 years. If you look at the, I think too, if you look at the schedule of funding progress, and granted, the 7.75% rate of return that you just brought up is built into this, they're looking at anticipating being funded somewhere between 89 and 92% based on the 3-year trend. But to your point, if that investment rate of return is really 3.5%, then that's probably 70% funded.
And you're not alone in questioning that. It's a political football right now.
Absolutely.
And a lot of accountants are saying you are way off base with it, but they
And it
have
affects
not.
the entire state.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean,
Yeah, so, but they have not seen fit to make any changes in it so far. But I agree with you. I mean, it's going to happen, and it will have an impact not just on us, but on everybody who's involved in this.
well, I mean, it brings up a bigger issue of the viability of the plan itself.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Don't say that.
Yes,
It
please.
stirs.
Okay. Well, I guess the last thing I should point out too, because we did talk about it quite a bit, is on page 24 is a summary at the bottom there of your change in compensated absences from year to year, so that you can see the growth in that. It was 814,000, increased by almost 52, resulting in 865,000 of liability. And again, we're working under this model of that there isn't an amount due within 1 year, because you tend to have a trend where your employment base uses what they earn during the current fiscal year. Any other questions?
Well, I had a question on the bottom of page 28
Mhm.
In your letter.
Mm-hmm.
You have a statement that's, we've noticed certain matters that we reported to management of the library in a separate letter dated.
And there's no date
No
yet because we
and
haven't dated it.
What is that about?
The exact comments that Mr. May was bringing up earlier, they're all sort of operational improvement opportunities. The fixed asset software, the compensated absence liability, the GASB 45 funding.
Okay. It's just at the bottom here, I didn't know. And is there a date to fill in for that? or-
It'll be the same, we date them the same date as the audit report. I
Oh,
can't.
so it will be issued?
Yeah, I
Got
can't
it.
date the audit report yet until the legal confirmations come back, and I couldn't take those until I met with you.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Are there any additional questions from the commission?
I want to go back to what Tim was saying. I think there might be a skepticism about these liabilities. They seem way out there, and, maybe we just pull these numbers out of thin air. How do we answer that?
I think you have to, I mean, in terms of the GASB 45 actuarial study for your OPEB obligation, I think you have to rely on the professionals that you hire to calculate those things for you and ask the exact same questions that you were asking earlier. I mean, I know for a fact that your OPEB obligation study does not include an investment rate of return of 7.75%. But if he was issuing you one with that, then I would be questioning him with that exact same question. You have to use your.
I believe you will. It's other people I'm concerned don't believe us in saying that this is a real liability.
I think that if you're hiring professionals to perform your work and you're asking those sorts of questions, then you've got to rely on the professionals that you're using for your work. If you're,
And
Well-
this audit also gets submitted, right, to the county?
Yeah.
The actuarial study does not get submitted to the county, the
But the
audit
audit
does.
does.
The audit does.
I think it's important to remember what we're talking about here is a commitment that the library has made to its employees to offer them a specific benefit in their retirement. And if we don't have the money, if we don't save the money and don't have it available, then we cannot keep our commitment to our employees.
I mean, right now, if the library went under, your existing retirees have no health insurance.
Right.
There's a liability right there. Even though your current employees haven't retired, there is a liability to your existing retirees. That's very real.
Plus the long-term commitment we have to everybody who works here.
Right.
So will the letter that you were talking about specifically discuss that issue in your recommendation that the commission take action to start funding it?
Our recommendation will be that the commission take action to determine a plan of funding, yes,
Okay.
but not how to fund.
So maybe that helps. I think your question is, how do we communicate to all our interested parties and stakeholders that this is a very real issue that we need to
Exactly.
that we
That's
need
right.
to put real dollars today, and perhaps.
I thought your question was reliance on the figure.
No.
No.
It's-
I'm sorry,
We
I
all-
misunderstood.
We all believe you. We've had a lot of internal discussion about this issue because for some of us, we're very worried about it. And we want to make sure that all the interested parties understand it. It can be complex, and that your letter may be a good documentation to help educate some of the stakeholders about it.
Thank you. You said it much better than I did.
Yeah. I think your risk as a governing body is ignoring it and not doing anything about it,
Putting our
not funding
hands-
it.
The other thing that I think is important that I'm getting in this is that this is an obligation to our employees, to our
Existing,
existing employees and
Yes.
past employees, and that it's not that we're taking, that in order to start funding it, we're not taking away a benefit, we're trying to honor an agreement. It's not, that's the thing that's important to me, that
right, it's not saving for
We
the
have to
future,
honor
it's not
the
saving for the
agreement.
future hirees.
No, but it's, okay. The thing is that it's seen $800,000 more out of our operating budget where we've already had to cut public services and employee benefits,
It's not realistic to switch to that model in 1 year.
No, I understand that, but I'm just saying that working towards that is a benefit to the employees
And it,
eventually.
and
Yes.
I think, somewhat to your question, Mary Evelyn, I am anticipating in this commission, many future discussions about our priorities when and if the economy starts to come back and property taxes raise and we see a little bit more in our budget, how we're going to spend that, whether we're going to add hours immediately, whether we're going to add staff immediately, whether we're going to put this into the trust for our unfunded obligation. And those who are interested in, hopefully will come to those meetings and there should be open, and I would anticipate a rather lively discussion about what our priorities need to be and how we need to figure, and it will figure into, I would guess, those discussions rather heavily.
I think too, I've talked to several people at the county, and there's obviously lots of different things happening in the county, but it might not be a bad idea, and I'm sure someone like Betsy Hose would come in and speak to the group about what other agencies are doing.
Didn't you suggest David Sundstrom might?
David Sundstrom is a real expert on it. He has spent a lot of time in different agencies and counties addressing this exact issue.
That would be useful. If there's no more from the commission, I will ask if the public has any comment. I know every time Will's here, he's so helpful and informative that people feel they want to engage and ask him questions. I would ask that what people do is stand up, ask their questions, make their comments, and then leave it up to the commission to pick up on one of those questions if that's something that the commission feels is necessary. I don't think it's fair to Will to ask him to sit there and field questions from the public if there are. But we'll open it to public comment at this time if anybody has any. Okay. Well,
This is our last year with you, right?
I believe so, yes.
yes.
Yes, it is. Well, as our auditor, I don't think he's going away entirely,
Oh, okay.
but not in the way we might think.
Yes, but that is because we change auditors every 5 years, and that's just so we don't develop too friendly a relationship and people can trust that we're having an independent and unbiased auditor looking at everything. But
Thank
we
you,
very
Will, for
much
all you
appreciate
do.
Thank you.
everything
Thank you.
That was a
Thank you,
clear, concise, thank you.
as always.
So by the way, we don't have a microphone stand tonight for the public. We only have a handheld. The stand itself disappeared. So what happened to the handheld?
It's over there in the center, right next to Ms.
Oh, she's ready.
Do you need me to stay for the vote? Do you think there'll be questions during the vote?
Okay, do we need to vote on this?
Yes.
It's under the action item.
Oh, I
I don't
don't,
want to leave you hanging on that if you think you need me here for it.
Can we move it out of order and
Yeah.
vote on it?
yeah, why don't we
Cheryl?
do that now? And that way you don't have to sit here through our other scintillating issues. Which one is it? Let's see. Action item, so it'd be,
It's 9.1.
9.1.
okay, let's jump to 9.1 out of order. And,
I so move.
yes, it's by motion, okay? So we're looking at 9.1, which is the acceptance of the audit as presented.
Second?
We have a motion second. Is there any further discussion? Any more questions?
Public.
Comment from the public? Okay, all in favor of accepting the audit as presented?
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Okay, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Will.
Thanks, Will.
Thanks, Will.
Okay, and now going back to the place in the calendar, the agenda. We are at the committee reports. The Joint Powers Committee, there was another, what are we calling it now?
I'm calling it the JRAC,
JAC,
the
Joint-
JP, Joint Powers Agreement Review Advisory Committee.
Right, that's where all the cities and county are there. There was a meeting on the 30th of November. I participated, Helena was there, and Sandy was there. It was an interesting meeting. Before I talk about the substance of it, there's also, I think the Joint Powers, JPA ad hoc, our subcommittee needs to figure out how we're going to do this because the review committee meets at the end of each month, on the last Friday of the month, and the next Monday is the committee meeting, the commission's meeting, and the subcommittee has no time to meet in between the two. So yet again, we've had the the committee has met, and the subcommittee of the commission has not gotten together to discuss what happened or come up with a formal game plan to discuss or anything like that. So I'm just going to start. Helena, jump in. Sandy, jump in if you so feel moved. So these are my impressions. It's interesting. Mike McGuire, our chair, is very much about moving everything along. The general impression I walked away with from this last meeting is everybody's very interested and engaged. There's a huge amount of education that needs to happen, and it is not going to happen in the 2-hour time slots once a month that we have set for the actual committee meetings. I think there's going to have to be an educational process, whether it's people meeting with their representatives and talking with them, or whether it's, we're going to try to put together some informational packets. I'm not sure how we are being allowed to disseminate information at the time. We have a chart that was put together partially by numbers that the tax manager had given us, and then we added to it with estimates of, with population numbers, and then, what percentage of the population each city has, and estimates of what percentage of our budget each city branch gets, and things like that. And we had this whole chart that had been put together that we were not allowed to disseminate at the meeting for reasons I still don't understand. So I'm have not had time yet, but we'll be contacting the county administrator, Veronica Ferguson, to try to find out how we will be allowed to disseminate educational information, which is just facts. I mean, we're just trying to get the information in front of the committee. Everybody was interested. I think the committee was a little frustrated with how short the discussion on the financial aspects. So last time was the discussion on our finances. And the tax manager gave a report that talked about the property taxes and where our money comes from, and what Prop 13 means, and the difficulty with changing things within Prop 13. And he also talked about redevelopment and the dissolution of the redevelopment agencies and what that means in terms of funding for the next 20 years. But that was pretty much the informational flow, and then it just sort of stopped, and and there's a whole lot more to our financial structure that wasn't talked about and that wasn't given, and I think that the participants don't know there's no more intergovernmental money. They don't know what it was to begin with, and they don't know it's gone, and they don't know what gifts and bequests look like, and they don't know what money gets spent on. And I'm not sure how to, I'm a little worried that the actual the committee meetings themselves are not going to be as thorough as we might want them to be in terms of those. Was that your impression, Helena? Or
Well,
am I
Aren't you
worrying
on
for
the,
nothing?
aren't you on the executive committee?
I am on the agenda committee, but
Yeah.
they've got that, yeah.
Well, maybe ask Mike McGuire
I'm-
how we can do that.
I will
Um,
do that as well.
And I thought they're going to continue to have discussions about financial stuff.
Well, what so they've got the financial was set for last time, and then they have set for next time is going to be,
Well, they're going to continue on finances and
Right.
add
Well,
facilities.
right.
Yeah.
They're gonna talk about finances, and then they're gonna talk about the facilities, which of course talks about finances, and then they're going to talk about services the month after that, which also, I mean, finances will be woven into it all, but I'm concerned that in weaving it in, it's going to be very piecemeal, and that there
They're
won't
not
be a
getting-
cohesive picture of what our finances are and where the money is going.
Where it comes from and where it goes.
Right.
Because it implied the other day that the only source of funding we have is property tax. And yes, that is over 90%, but it's not all.
Right.
So I'm thinking, the reason that you can't just hand out things at the meeting is the Brown Act.
But we
And that
had-
we are limited by it here. If
Right.
you recall, there've been some times in the past, like when we've done when I wrote up that draft
Right.
thing about the
But we had enough
decision to
copies.
close the hours, we couldn't just hand it out and talk about it. We had to, make
We-
sure that it was available to the public before we really
We had
talked about
50,
that.
we had 50 copies.
We had copies for the public.
But
But I think there has to be that
No, not necessarily, not.
No,
if it's-
72-hour notice. So what I'm thinking
I
is,
think for it to be included in the packet, it does, but I don't know. I know that Sol put together a document that was at everybody's seat and available to the
but
public.
we couldn't
when-
discuss it. The committee
No,
couldn't
no,
discuss
it
it.
couldn't discuss it, but
Right.
I was told not
That
to
you couldn't
even
even pass it
disseminate
out? Oh.
the information. So I want to find out what the rules are for handing it out and how we can get information to the committee members, because I think that's important.
I mean, I have in my head a whole list of
But
information
maybe
they
the
need about
difference
the
is
facilities.
you're on the committee, And so for you to be handing it out,
Maybe.
it's a breach of the
Well,
Brown Act.
no,
But for
actually-
the public to bring something, it's a different situation.
I don't know, but I'm going to ask both
Veronica told
and-
me the reason she didn't want it distributed is that Eric had not verified the numbers from on the sheet.
Well, those numbers came from Eric.
Well, that's
No.
kind of our problem. I mean, if it's our
Right.
document, that's our problem, not their
Right.
problem.
Right, but I think that, as I said, I think I'm just going to have to find out how the flow of information is meant to go, and then we will try to work with that to make sure that we get the information out there. But I am concerned that there won't be necessarily in a nice cohesive manner, the flow of the information that people will need to make the decisions they're going to be making about the library. But that was my concern, and you may not have seen it, so I'm
Well,
just saying.
I'm thinking, though, that because you're on the agenda committee,
Right.
that you can add those things into the agenda and
Well,
make sure that there's time to do
I
that.
can suggest it.
True, but,
You know.
I mean,
Right. No, that's true. I certainly have and will continue to.
and then I would just say that slideshow that he gave, it should be on their website. I don't know if
It
it
is.
is, yeah.
It's
So,
supposed to be.
Yeah. The other thing I thought was interesting and found also concerning was there's a lot of discussion last time and this most recent meeting about what equity of service is. And I mean, when you read our current JPA, equity of service is a foundational principle under which I think this library system is developed, and I think it's very important. I don't think that it's a concept that's readily understood by the rest of the committee. I'm not sure I know how to articulate it, and I'm not sure it's accepted by the rest of the committee.
I think in order to understand your definition of it, because I can see it when Sarah Gurney talked about, how she thought of equity of service, I thought, well, you can give it a different construction. You absolutely can. So I think a clear explanation of what
Right.
the library means when they're saying equity of service
Right,
is
and so-
definitely in order, because they're going to talk about
Right.
that.
And I was thinking, actually, this is something I know Sandy thinks about a lot, and maybe you can give us what the library's understanding of equity of service is, just for us to start thinking about it.
I told Julia, part of my problem with this is it's so gut, because that's essentially what I did for 20 to 30 years, is work on equity of service in states and try to make sure that each community had access to the same level of library service that richer communities did. It's what state librarians do. But it has to do with making sure that no matter how many resources are available from a community, the library that serves that community is as good and has the same resources and personnel and hours and everything as those in the other communities. Doesn't mean that you don't tailor services and collections necessarily to meet the needs of that unique community. But it means that the poorer communities have can have the same level of service, and there are a range of things, but the current JPA talks about hours of service, collections, and staffing. That you've got a certain baseline that assures that they're going to get good quality library service. Shirley Zane, when I was talking with her, talked about her experience in Charleston, South Carolina, when she visited family and went to the closest branch, which was in a poor community. And it was not as rich a collection. It was shabby. It wasn't taken care of. And then you go to the richer part of the community, and the library was bright and shiny and full of resources and staff and all. So what you can get is a have and have not sort of environment if you're not careful. So that, to me personally, is what equity of service, and I think when we talk about the development of libraries, that's what equity of service is. It's when you walk into the door of your local library, you should have the same level of service that they have across the county or across in the state.
The same basic level of service.
Well, I think, yeah, basics. But we also, when we start enhancing, we try to be fair with programming, with all sorts of other resources. It's like having 11 children, you try to take care of all of them equally so that left behind.
Says, I think somebody, and it could be the lab member who wrote suggestions to the JPA committee, but I'm not positive because I don't have that with me. But she looked at Sacramento County, for instance, and what they do in their JPA is kind of spelled out
Right.
that you have this basic level of service that all the libraries in Sacramento County have who are in the JPA. And then each community can enhance that
Right,
by
but that,
certain funding and
That-
if they choose to. So I think that's what perhaps Sarah Gurney was talking about too.
I think that that's something that needs to be explored very carefully by this commission, because once again, you end up with haves and have-nots. Because the richer communities can afford things that the poorer communities cannot. That's one thing to think about. And another is the complexity of managing a system where you're never sure. Gets with, I forget how many branches Sacramento has.
a lot.
They have 30
A lot more than
something.
we do. Yeah.
The complexity of managing the finances, the cost to the library of managing all that additional service and planning and all of that has to include enough money to make sure that the system has the money to support what they want to do too.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what the conversation will probably come to, though, is that, people will have that different perspective. Because, other systems, the libraries aren't open the exact same hours, for instance, or the same days and
Well,
things
we
like
weren't
that.
either, but we did this. I think the thing to remember is the reason we're open the way we are now is for substitute coverage. Absences, but
Right,
before.
I'm just throwing out there that,
Yeah.
when people talk about equity of services, they're going to look at a lot of different things and not necessarily see it from our perspective.
Right, and that's where I think Julia's talking about the need to educate, we can't, about this basic fundamental right of access to service.
Well, I think we should be open to other possibilities, but also I think you're going to have to be more concrete about when you
Right.
explain it
Right.
and give real concrete examples.
Yes, I would agree with that. I think I don't know how open I want to be to disparate services. I have to tell you that. I do agree that we should be open to different systems, but if the system that we're being asked to adopt says if you can afford it, you get more service than a city that can't, I'm not sure I'm down with that as a principle.
I
But
don't
that's
think
just a
that has to be
conversation.
the reasonable conclusion, though.
What?
So I don't think that has to be the reasonable conclusion to that discussion. So
Oh,
that's
no,
all I'm
no.
just saying is to be a little open to,
Right.
what they want to bring up.
Right, oh, no, absolutely. I don't see shutting down any conversation. But
Well, and I think it's important to remember that the current structure of ours is unique to try to help us cope with a unique situation, which is the need to cover the staffing. But prior to, we used to have, although they all had the same number of hours, they were open different nights, and they had
Right,
different,
right.
different schedules.
Right. So it would seem like the report on the hours probably needs some work then, to make it have more of a conclusion, because it is kind of, there is no suggestion at the end of it, there's no resolution, there's no, this
'Cause-
really clearly has saved us this much money.
Wait, I'm confused
I'm
now. We've
sorry.
jumped to the report on the hours. I
Because
don't
she
think
raised it.
the committee, but the JPA committee doesn't have that report. They're not looking at it.
But that could be used as an example of,
I'm sorry,
It
Helene.
could
I'm
be-
not following.
well, I'm sorry, I thought you were using it as an example of the same kind of service countywide.
No, I'm simply saying that people are confusing the system we have in place right now, where we have this lockstep set of hours and schedule because we had to find a way to save that money and use the staff we have to cover absences.
So
But
think-
people are conflating.
Right.
They're assuming that that's what we're talking about, and we're not.
I think people conflate the current schedule with equity of service, and I think we need to explain that it's not.
Right.
Right, I need to do a better job of that. But those of you talking to your, representatives on the committee could do it as well, because as I said, I'm not sure how much time we're going to have up there in those 2-hour spans. There's a lot to cover. So,
Julia, did
Yeah.
the city of Sonoma change its representation on the committee?
well, Linda Kelly was there, but then, so was her,
Carol?
Carol
the
Jovenata.
person who's coming
Yeah.
in. She was at the meeting, and she'll be representing the city of Sonoma
Okay.
next time. Apparently, Linda Kelly will still be there, but she'll be representing Windsor.
Actually, she's not, they're going to
Oh, she's not
continue
gonna
with
be
their
there.
assistant
Okay.
city manager. So she won't be on the committee, as I understand it. And I did get to meet
Is there a
Carol.
date for the next meeting?
Yes.
Yes, it's December 20th, and although usually it is the last Friday of the month because of Christmas and holidays, they made it December 20th from 3 to 5 at the County Board of Supervisors room.
And we can talk about this. I'll be there, and so the three of us will be there at that meeting. Do we want to go out, have a committee meeting afterwards at dinner?
We can talk about that.
Okay.
I don't think I can
Okay,
that
so
day.
Revenue Committee.
So we met.
Wait, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to leave the public
Offer
out. Public
comments.
comment. Yes.
Are those meetings, the JPA meetings, open to the public?
Yes.
Ask her to,
Yes.
be sure to ask people to use the microphone.
Okay. Is there any other public comment on the JPA meeting? Revenue Committee.
So Mary Evelyn was not able to make our meeting, probably because we forgot to tell her when it was going to be. But Susan and I met by phone right after the JPA meeting, and we had an
That's why you
opportunity.
disappeared so quickly.
Yeah, I was late to call her, supposed to call her at 4, and that meeting, the JPA meeting, went a little bit late. So we actually were focusing mostly during our meeting on the audit and talking about it and figuring out, trying to figure out the OPEB. So it was good to have those things clarified here, and I think you had it. And Susan was sick, so she wasn't feeling good. So our meetings have been the last Friday of the month at 4 o'clock. But if that's not going to be a good time for you, we can. Okay. The other thing that we talked about is revenue ideas, and we haven't talked about it very in depth. We've been focusing more about the financial stuff and trying to understand the library's different financial statements and budget and such. And we will miss Elisa, who was helping to educate us a little bit more. But we talked a little bit about, I think the public, and specifically actually a member of the Sebastopol lab, had suggested the passport idea, and we haven't had a chance to look into it in depth. However, the Sacramento County Public Library says on their website that they're going to start to do the passport process. So we'll talk to them and find out, what made them make that decision, and we'll come back with a little bit more information about the whole process and what they expect out of it.
And if they're using staff or volunteers to do it, I'd be very interested
Right,
in that.
and the facilities requirements, as well
Okay.
as the staffing requirements.
Yeah. And the other thing that they're doing that's very interesting and is very intriguing, and I actually have a whole handout on it if people are interested, but I don't have it with me, but they have an espresso book machine. Have you heard of that, Sandy?
A what?
It's kind of cool. It sounds kind of cool.
It's a vending machine with books. right?
You can do self-publishing.
That's something else then.
Well, it could do a couple things. You can order up a book, and it'll print it for you right there. So there's a fee charged for that. If somebody from the public comes in and says, I would like a copy of this book, they would pay a fee. The other thing they can do is self-publish. Anybody can take their work to the library and pay a fee to have it published through this espresso book machine. So it's very intriguing. And it's, it's like a $600 publishing fee, something like that. But they're using it to probably to incur interest in the library itself, but also a service to the community and also to raise funds. So they have it there. I'd love to go take a look at it and see how it really works and talk to them about how they decided to do this. Different libraries around the country or have bought these machines and are doing this same work. So they're not cheap, but in the over time it could earn you back your money plus. So
Interesting idea.
that's it.
Okay.
I have a question about, have we talked about the passport process before?
We were given a recommendation by a member of Sebastopol Lab, and I believe it might have gone directly to Julia, who
Yeah.
turned it over to Sandy.
At-
And so we talked about it just,
Right, we talked, well, it was at the all-county lab meeting. One of the Sebastopol people I was sitting at the table with gave me this information sheet about a library in the Midwest, I think. That was
It's Cuyahoga County.
Okay, but it also came up at some commission meeting, because I remember
I
Stephen
was pushing
Alcorta
it.
talking about it.
I was talking about it because it looked like an interesting idea. I think in our county, when we look at it, if it looks feasible, we want to think about if we can do it on a volunteer-run basis rather than trying to fit it into staff time, because we're so incredibly spread thin with our staff anyway, but
And also whether there's actually space to do
space,
it.
I mean, all those questions.
yeah.
But I
And
think
don't
it's a
know, I
very
should
interesting
talk to you,
idea.
Sandy. I don't know if anybody has had a chance to pursue it on your staff. I think Julia had given it to you to.
Right, I know, we've had some informal discussion about it, but haven't had the time to really
Okay.
delve into it.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Is there public comment on the Revenue Committee report? Okay. Approval of minutes? Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right. Any changes, modifications? Okay. Public comment? Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Correspondence and coverage. Is there any commission discussion on that? Public comment? Consent calendar.
There is
There's
nothing.
no items on it this time. Okay, so then action items by resolution. We have 8.1. That is, you want to give us a rough outline of this?
This is related to those statements of economic interest we have to file every April. And the law requires that we periodically review the policy and our conflict of interest code every 2 years. So this is that opportunity, and staff suggests that the only change that really needs to be made is to clean up on the appendix the designated positions that are required to file the report.
And what are the changes?
If you look, we deleted the facility services manager and added the assistant to the director. The facility services manager position no longer exists.
Okay. All right, do I hear a motion?
I have, well, make a motion first. I so move.
Second? Second. Okay, discussion?
I have a question here on the definition of a consultant.
Right.
Maybe it's like a consultant is an employee, is what it says.
Well,
This is on page 8 at the small
Right,
paragraph
right.
at the bottom.
It has to do with consultants who may be doing work which would require them to file a statement of economic interest, which is a judgment call. And
I,
the
I,
one,
I understand that, but my understanding of a consultant is not by definition an employee.
I think what they're trying to get at here is an employee who, for some particular specific project, has to be able to do something. And that's where they're calling them consultants.
Okay, so it's just a general category of an employee, sort of a catch-all, it seems to me,
Right.
under the designated positions. Is that correct? Anyone who is not listed here falls under the consultant.
If they're asked to do something.
you know, I had some notes on that, and I don't have them with me because I interpreted it slightly differently. If you want to wait, I can clear up that.
I don't think it's a big issue. When I read it, it
Yeah.
just confused me because it's almost a
It would make,
contradiction in terms.
it would make sense to me that if you employ a consultant, not necessarily as a full-time employee, but you are you're employing somebody to do something. I read this and assumed it meant that if somebody is either making decisions or making recommendations to us on how to actually spend money, then they should file one of these forms to make sure there's no conflict of interest. And I assume that although the term employee is used, it could mean an independent contractor that we, the commission, employs or the library employs. I could be wrong on that, though. Thank you for asking.
I'm okay with that. It's just that when I looked at the definition, it looked to be a conflict, but I understand it becomes a catch-all for someone who may not be named here, but who may have to file one of these declarations.
Yeah, so we don't have to come back and
We
do
don't have
this.
to come back every time we do something and name that person.
Right.
I'm okay with that.
Okay, any further discussion? Public comment? All right, did we want to?
You have action.
Explanation, or did you want to vote on it?
No,
Okay,
You have a resolution to adopt. That's the action.
okay. Oh, I thought we had a motion.
Well, there's a motion
Right.
to
No,
We
adopt
have
the
both them
resolution.
removed, so now I
Right.
guess we have to vote.
Yes,
Do we have to vote individually?
No.
Okay.
okay. All in favor of adopting the resolution as presented here?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? And the second is the Cradle to Career participation.
And Kathy Deweese can speak to that.
Kathy Deweese can speak to that.
Kathy, would you move to? Yeah.
And can you start by explaining to us what type of commitment is being asked of the library and what resources it would take if we actually committed ourselves to it?
Okay. Before I respond to that specific question, I just also wanted to introduce Kelly Noe, who is the coordinator from the Sonoma County Health, Department of Health Services. She is the coordinator for this program for the county, and
So
if we
maybe
have other
she wants to-
questions, she can also be a resource. Back to your question, what is being asked of us in doing this? In general, this is a framework of goals that we want all children, youth, and adults entering the workforce to have reached by the year 2020. So that's the 5 goals are on the documentation that we've given you. The Sonoma County Library, in my opinion, we already are doing a lot of great work in support of these goals. All of our early literacy programming, our story times, our book clubs, we have teen programming, we have career programming, all kinds of stuff that we're already doing. The way I see it, this is not going to take additional workload or additional staff time. What it's going to take is taking our existing programming and having a focus that we're saying, okay, this programming that we're doing, we are doing it because in light of this goal number 1 or goal number 2. Things that we're already doing, but just with the focus of we are doing this in tandem with this countywide initiative. The other thing that I can see us doing is being a resource or a resource sharing for other organizations or other programming that's going on around the county, in that provide a book list or provide a pathfinder, create a bibliography, which is regular reference librarian work, which we are doing for the schools, we are doing for classes, that kind of stuff. And to me, this is enriching what we're already doing.
Right, and it means that the library's at the table when, in a project that focuses on things that exactly dovetail with what we're all about in our goals. And it also it helps make what we're already doing that much more visible too. But it's just such a natural partnership. I think the collaboration, the fact that our children's services are already a strength.
Right. Now,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, do you anticipate that this will require any additional staff time that's not currently being given to these things? Is this going to require reorganization of how staff uses their time?
I don't see it doing so, no. I have been participating in, like, they've got monthly virtual meetings, that kind of stuff. Sure, that's additional time. In the actual pledge that organizations are asked to pledge to or to commit to, one of the things that it asks us to do is when it's time for us to look at our organizational goals for the coming year, to, again, shift the focus a little bit so that we are actually thinking of it, okay, what are we doing towards this? What are we doing towards that? Which I think that, again, these are things that we are doing, we just need to put it in the framework.
What other organizations are involved with this besides the county?
I'm actually going to let Kelly answer that. Come on up. If that's okay. Oh, sure, sure. I do have a list from the most recent email of the most recent community pledge signers include Career Development Workforce Preparation Services, the Office of Education, Sonoma County Office of Education, Cloverdale School District, Cotati Roanoke Park Unified School District, First Five Sonoma County Workforce Investment Board. I mean, there's the list goes on, but please.
So this really kicked off in September. We had about 380 people attend the launch, and really, as is being stated, it's not that we're asking you to do an additional thing. It's really about framing the work that you're already doing under this common language for our counties, so that we're all kind of, rather than having arrows all pointing off in different directions, we're really all pointing on the same path of getting to the outcomes that we really want for young people, and seeing how, as a community, we can say, okay, we want to prioritize children, youth, and families. And to answer your question about who signed on, you've got the list, and this really is about how we build those cross-sector partnerships to support those outcomes for young people. So better connecting, rather than the library commission sitting in this room by yourselves having this discussion, connecting it out to the broader community and helping to better connect those dots and increasing access. I was really excited when I first got in here to hear about the work being done in Cloverdale with the school system. So that's just one example about how do we think a little bit differently about how we're implementing programs to better support the broader community. And Cradle to Career, it's not a program, as was already stated, and my staff position has been created to really support this work. So it's really just a support system in our community to help the good work that's already happening, but just better connect the work, and so there's not duplication, and the activities are supporting one another.
Is there a possibility that the participating organizations will be asked for financial resources in the future?
No, so we're not asking for financial resources. If ever was, and don't quote me that there are currently financial resources, but really, our ideal dream would be if there ever was financial resources, it would be really going the other direction of being able to, identify those things that are really working in our community and how we scale those up and how do we generate the resources in our local community, new resources, not just, sharing the same $50 around our community, but really be able to generate those new resources to jumpstart those programs.
What are by the way, this is a noun that I haven't heard before. What are the two convenings a year?
But it's similar to the one we had in the fall, which was the launch. Every year we'll be having a large convening to kind of bring those cross-sector individuals together to really talk about the planning that's happened across the year, where we've gotten to. You know, our goal in the county is to really be the healthiest county by the year 2020. So we want to make sure that yearly we're bringing people together, so it's not 2019 and we're like, oops, okay, we only have a year to really get there. And then in the spring, to have a smaller convening that would probably be more focused around different topic areas and could do different breakout sessions. A lot of groups throughout the county want to convene cross-sector groups to focus on different areas. For instance, workforce strategies. There's a workforce strategies group that wants to talk about career development. 0 to 5 folks want to really convene people around different aspects. So how do we, rather than having people have to go to multiple different meetings, how do we make it a little bit easier for people to attend something like that?
And a comment that I would make is that we as the library have a finger in all of those pies, and since we're so good at marketing ourselves,
Yeah, right.
ironic, people might not know about some of our
Exactly.
career resources or
Right.
our online databases or our children's program. I mean, there's a lot that I think this is going to help us in getting what we're already doing, what we already have,
Right.
more access, more publicity, more use.
And I think, too, I just want to add on top of that, that it's really kind of acknowledging that schools can't do it alone. And it's not about placing blame on the schools, but it's really kind of in that idea of together, we really can create the healthy community that we want. And so being able to share some of those resources that maybe some schools aren't aware of. So how do we better connect those dots for people?
So I wonder if this may not be something that your program would deal with, but I hear from librarians sometimes that teachers in the schools assign certain topics to do reports, but they haven't told the library, so the library hasn't had a chance to
Right.
order the books.
It's an
So
age-old-
could that be
That would be
Right.
so wonderful.
made
That
a little
that
bit
is
better through your
that is
program?
every
Right, and
library, every school,
So
everywhere. Yeah.
that's kind of our ideal dream. I encourage everyone to go to Nashville, Tennessee, and look at an idea they have there called Limitless Libraries that really does do just that. They've basically coordinated their public library system with their school library system, so it opened up all of those resources to all the students and both community members on both sides, so the schools became kind of what's called the community schools model. They became the hub where after school hours resources could be offered there and vice versa. So I would say, I can't say yes, that would happen tomorrow, but I love that you brought that up, and thank you, because I think that would be really ideal for the community.
It's an age-old issue. I just
Yeah.
said, I wish I had $1 for every time I've heard.
Go check it, seriously, look at in Nashville, Tennessee, their Limitless Libraries.
I've
They've
heard
really-
about 'em.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a cutting-edge model, and I was very excited. A small team of us are actually going back to Nashville in January, because they have a lot of different programs that they've been able to implement, not just that piece, but a lot of different things to kind of look and see what they've been able to do there and accomplish.
I heard about it from both Shirley Zane and Efren, who were both very excited about the
Right.
ideas.
And yeah, and we've touched base with Supervisor McGuire also, who was at the launch, kind of touched base with, said the same thing, so, yeah.
Seems to me that anything we do of a collaborative nature is a good thing.
Yes,
Yes.
you're here.
Any more questions from the commission? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
So you have an
So,
action.
I need to hear a motion. Do I have a motion?
Sure.
Second? Second. Okay. Any further discussion or questions from the commission? Comments from the public? Okay, all in favor? Oh, go ahead. Do you want to take the microphone there?
Yeah, I haven't heard of this before, and so I'm just looking at it now, but the way that's been described just now, it sounds rather vague, and it sounds as though, when they say that you have to have some kind of sign up, I don't know what the word was exactly that was used, it makes me think a little bit of too much, being collaborative is good to some degree, but I also think that communities need to be careful that they don't send every child down the same path in everything. So in other words, that you don't want to have everything so organized and so standardized that there isn't, room for thought and original thought and independent thought. And so that's my concern when I hear this. I think to myself, well, how much is there as far as this, being standardized and so on? So that's something that I think should be thought through a little bit.
Go ahead, if you would like to comment on it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I think that that's a really valid and great piece, and I think the collaboration piece is really about the organizations who are supporting the young people, and I think that you really hit the nail on the head, that it's not really one size fits all, and that we need to make sure that all the opportunities that a young person can, obtain, be interested in, that they're made aware of those opportunities. And I think that that's really kind of that mindset shift, that it's not, we want to make sure that we have high expectations for young people, that if they want to go to college, that's an option for them. But there's so many different options out there, and, a lot of jobs out there that, don't need a 4-year degree, that, need post-secondary training or an associate's degree. And so making sure that our young people are supported in achieving their dreams and whatever that looks like and whatever success looks like for that young person. So thank you for putting that out, because I think the collaboration piece that we're really in, those connecting the dots, are really for the people who are implementing those services, so there's not duplication from the service model side. I hope that kind of answers
Wasn't
that.
there an article in the PD on this whole program a couple of weeks ago?
Yes, there was Nicholas did a nice a little write-up about Cradle to Career.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? Okay. All in favor of the Sonoma County Library Commission adopting the resolution agreeing to be a community partner in Cradle to Careers initiative? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming, Kelly.
Yes,
Julia, I have a question.
yeah.
Could we, in the next action items, the mid-year budget adjustment, could that come down after we have the discussion about Liebert and Cassidy and the open source money? I
That's
think-
fine. I was actually going to say that I struggled with how to put these in order. They're a package of 3.
Yeah.
So it's up,
Sure.
I
it
would
makes
think that
sense.
after we talk about
Right,
Okay.
those other 2, that then we can do the.
right.
That's fine. Let's go to 9.3 then, and okay, here we go. So, you want to give us the highlights, Sandy?
Well, essentially, we had an agreement that was dated from May to December 31st, for Liebert Cassidy's services, not just in labor relations, but in several other areas. We've already hit the ceiling of how much money that agreement covered. So this would take us in through, I would hope, through the end of the fiscal year.
And what services are we using besides labor negotiations?
We had an equal employment opportunity case that we needed legal assistance on. We also have the PERB petition for unit, the SEIU petition for unit modification that's been as costly or more costly than the labor relations side. And we still don't have an opinion on that one, and if it's an unfavorable opinion to us, then the commission will have to make a decision about whether it wishes to pursue further. So I was also a little stunned, because I hadn't really looked at the numbers, to realize last year we spent $123,000 on legal services, keeping in mind that that also includes county council.
That was my other question. Are these services that county council could provide?
No.
Okay.
In fact, we recently approached them about potentially doing something else we were thinking about doing, that, rather than having Liebert Cassidy do it, and they told us, no, ask Liebert Cassidy, because they don't have the kind of expertise on staff.
So with Liebert and Cassidy right now, how far over budget are we?
I just signed to, well, remembering it went back to May, I didn't bring those numbers with me, but we're already at about 60,000, and I just signed 3 invoices for October that totaled almost $27,000.
And what did we have budgeted? 75?
No, we only have 40,000 budgeted this year.
So, and our contract with Liebert and Cassidy is for how much? Was for how much?
It was not to exceed, I believe, 47.5.
So it just occurs to me, how come we're still paying, or how come we're still using the services when we have a contract that says we can't exceed this amount? I mean, that just seems
That's an excellent
contrary.
question, and we're kind of between a rock and a hard place, because we can't stop doing what we're doing.
Well,
I agree.
generally speaking, when you have a contract, you have to stop when you get
Right.
to that limit. You have to. It's
Right.
like with the Sebastopol remodel, the services had to stop when we had exceeded the contract. So I'm not clear that, I have a little problem with signing a contract and then it just doesn't mean anything.
No, I agree.
Have you asked Liebert Cassidy why they continued?
This agreement we have because of pressure on our side, not on theirs.
I know.
But still, it would seem like you should have come to the commission at that point, not to just keep hiring them and pay them.
Well, it only became clear to me that we had hit, I was not monitoring it myself. I was depending on other people to monitor it. And we hit the ceiling before it was called to my attention. I don't disagree with anything you're saying, Helena. But we'd already used, the bill that I looked at Friday was for October. That was nearly, whatever I just said.
20,000.
No, it was nearly 27,000. And it included the brief for PERB that had a deadline and things like that.
So going forward, assuming we come up with a new number, will there be a mechanism by which, I guess the early warning would be from them to say, hey, you're about to hit your...
Actually, it has to come from our side. They don't look at that kind of thing.
But how would we know until they send the bill?
Well, we'd know when we're getting close to there will be a person monitoring how much we've spent, so that before we go into another month where we're going to risk exceeding the amount, that person will ring the alarm bell.
So how much would we have to increase our budget to cover the current bills?
I'm suggesting $75,000.
I see that, but I'm not, that's...
That
that's
includes the current bills.
That covers the current bills plus how much going forward?
Whatever 30,000, 29,000 is from 75. I'm hoping, I'm optimistic that we will see a decrease in the amount of time it takes. If we have to go back and do more per work, we'll have to up the amount.
So it's hard to tell from what you have on the back here. I don't know how much they charge an hour.
Depends, because we have about 3 or 4 attorneys who've worked on this.
Okay, so it's not just Kelly,
No,
but she's the only one who does negotiations?
right.
And,
And there's always, if for instance, if she gives us an opinion, then it's usually reviewed by one of the full partners, or she has a guy named Matt Nankato, I think his name is, who is doing a lot of the office work on projects for us.
And how much of the negotiations, because I remember at the beginning of the year when we were doing this contract, we talked about how our staff is quite capable of doing negotiations, that they have for the last
Well-
2 to 3 years been in the negotiations, and we talked about Kelly not doing a lot of the negotiations.
Well, when we're in serious negotiations, there are often legal questions that come up at the table. And unless we have Kelly there with her experience, our staff still doesn't have that kind of expertise.
But can't they take a recess and go give her a phone call? I mean, I don't know why she has to be there the whole time. That's a huge expense when I thought we all felt very confident in our staff.
I disagree that was the discussion.
That was-
You're
yeah.
remembering it differently than I did. We talked about it, and my memory is that several of us expressed the opinion that while we have confidence in our staff, there had been a huge change. I don't know if you were here when we first started using Liebert Cassidy, but we were at a standstill, and when Liebert Cassidy came in, they were able to get the negotiations moving forward again, and we were, and while I do have confidence in our staff, I agree that there's a lot of legal things that are ins and outs that our staff wouldn't, without going to law school and training in this area of law, there's things I don't know. And I'm a lawyer because this isn't my area of expertise either. And so I think when we are in serious negotiations and the union is bringing up regulations and bringing up rules and bringing up law that
And threatening.
we have to stop every 10 minutes to go check and see if it's accurate or not, it doesn't make sense to not have the lawyer at the table at that point.
Well, I don't know how slow negotiations went before, but I can't say that they're that speedy.
No, they're not that speedy now. They were worse. I have to say that.
It would take over a year to get a contract
Yes.
done?
Yes.
Besides the fact that there are often threats made, and in the negotiations of filing suit and whatever, and it really does help to have somebody with legal background and negotiating background at the table. There have been times when Kelly's helped us see clearly what our options were and were not legally in the course of just a meet and confer over Mark's position. It's very different negotiating than it was when I first came, and even when I was more involved myself.
I think we're getting a little bit off the question here. We are going into closed session to discuss the current contract negotiations, and I think maybe if we want to bring up the issue of whether or not we want and need Kelly to continue on our behalf, maybe in closed session we ought to knock that around. But I think right here we're talking about a financial item. And there are two things. We have, I guess, an unpaid bill that's going over, well, maybe it's not unpaid, but it's going over the amount that was authorized. So that's the first thing we have to consider. And then the second thing is, and we're not authorizing spending additional money, we're authorizing giving Sandy the opportunity or changing the budget to the point where if in fact we have to spend it, it's there.
Well,
And I do think
me-
that we need some built-in controls here, whether it be someone in Sandy's office or someone in the lawyer's office to say, folks, you are at the amount of money that you've committed to under the contract, and if you want us to continue, we're going over the contract.
And let me make sure I understand what's on the table. Our current billing puts us over the amount previously authorized, but the amount that you are suggesting is because you do anticipate additional billing to be coming down the road to get us through all the stuff we still need to do, is that correct?
Right. Well, and remember that it's actually two things. There's the question of extending the agreement for an additional $75,000, not to exceed. That's one piece. The other piece is the budget adjustment, because only $40,000 was budgeted for legal services in this fiscal year. Last year, we spent $123,000. So there's an
That
so
includes county council?
That includes county council.
The 123 includes county council as well?
Yes.
Okay. Does the, but the 75,000 would be just for Liebert Cassidy? That would be to extend their contract not to exceed?
Actually, let me see what I did on that one. Yes, that's true.
Okay.
So
But
I,
the budget adjustment is the same amount. That's a good observation.
I think I'm reluctant to agree to this amount because there haven't been, there hasn't been close control over it. You can't have a contract, as I said before, and exceed that contract payment.
I would say there's a weakness in our budget and finance office and their ability to monitor this kind of thing, and so it falls to my office, and it fell through the cracks. I'll be very honest with you.
But the responsibility ultimately is yours, no matter who's...
It's ultimately mine, yes.
And I don't know, just to not even see the bills for a couple of months. And so...
No, I approve all the bills. They were running behind on billing at Liebert Cassidy, because we actually called them when I started working on this and realized what a problem we had to find out what the last bill is that we should have received. So we didn't get the October 31st bill until November 30th. And they come to my office.
And at the end of October, how over budget were we?
Whatever you see on this printout is,
Well, I don't have a calculator to try to figure that out.
well, I'm sorry, are you talking over budget or over the contract?
Over the contract.
We were just about at the contract, because it included because it went from May until December.
So you're saying that the bill we paid before we got the November 30th bill, we were close to the contract
We haven't,
amount?
no, the bill, the October, not the October, not the November, the September bill took us close. But we're not getting the bills until the end of the next
Right.
month.
So I understand that the one that came on November 30th was for the month of October.
That's correct.
Okay, so at the end of September, we were close. Okay, and when did it come to your attention?
That it was close
That yeah.
when
or-
I
or-
started working on the extension of the contract,
Which was,
when I got back from vacation.
okay.
When you got back from vacation in November?
Yes.
I just don't see how we ever will really know, because they're going to have potentially different billing rates based on who's doing what. If it's an attorney or a partner reviewing something or an office person, it feels like it would be very hard for us to monitor when we're getting
Right.
near that edge, that we somehow need to request that they do that to tell us, okay, we have a contract that authorizes this amount, and we need to know when we're getting near that threshold. And maybe we even say, tell us when we're within $5,000 or whatever it is, because I don't know until the bill shows up in your desk 30 days later how
Right.
you would know.
No.
You're not going to know. But I do think we need to request them to have a trigger, and maybe, set a reasonable amount back and say, there's always a lag in billing. You need to tell us when we hit this amount. So, and give yourself enough of a buffer that, you can keep us apprised.
So I have just two quick questions. So why did we budget only 40,000?
That's an excellent question.
But you draft up the budget with the help of your staff, so I'm not...
Actually, yeah, Elisa did that one, and I have to say, it was a mistake on my part not to have noticed that was way too low.
And my other question is, where will this money come from?
It's coming out of the, it's shown on that sheet. It's coming out of a combination of the carryover of the money not there on the budget sheet. And that's why I don't think you can talk about this one in isolation, because the budget situation is it has some complexities. I think perhaps what we want to do is have this discussion and then go back and look at the budget adjustment.
I don't see where it's coming from on the budget adjustment.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I know what you're asking.
All
If you look under-
I'm curious about is where we're finding the money to cover this.
There are a series,
What page are you on?
I'm back to document 9.2.1.
Okay.
And I think the best thing to do would be to go over this document and the totality of both the income and expenditure adjustments that are being, that are here, so you can see in context.
So it looks like this is the redevelopment money you're taking it out of there?
No, it's not. We made a commitment that we would, any surplus that we had left at the end of last year would go into this year's operating budget in recognition of the fact that staff had made those, my brain's not working, staff had given up and agreed to the MTOs. So if you look, you've got the line that's in blue, adjust for fiscal 11-12 savings. The agreement was that would be added back in to our income for this year.
Where did that money come from, though? I think that was the question.
It came from a whole series of savings last year.
So that was some of that redevelopment, or no?
No,
Okay.
it's saving, it may have been a small amount, but I think the redevelopment was only about 20,000. It has to do with the totality of our savings, the bottom line, positive bottom line from last year.
This is the 400,000 that Will was saying that
Right.
because we reduced expenditures, we were able to save, and Helena asked if it was because of the library closure.
That wasn't 400, was it?
That was 400, yeah.
So that's where one of the adjustments comes. Let's go down to revenue. Intergovernmental revenues, that extra 40,000 is this grant from NorthNet that's in this packet. And charges for service is 60,000. This is where we have an issue because we had originally projected that the new fines might bring in as much as 300,000. But we have 6 weeks worth of pattern of expenditures, and I'm not comfortable projecting an increase of more than 60,000 at this point based on the October income. We can't figure out where the problem is.
Is it you can't figure out, so we don't know whether that's because people are returning books more timely or because they're just not paying their late fees?
Well, there are several issues there. They are returning their DVDs very quickly, which is a good thing.
That was what we wanted.
And they haven't been paying down, and we're not sure why. You know, we changed the ceiling from 10 to 5. There's still a hefty amount that hasn't been paid in that. At the same time, the percentage of what we call waves, where staff has waived fines, has gone up by about 22 to 25%. So some of it may be coming from that. The other thing is I got some preliminary numbers through the middle of November, and they were,
Wait, what is that buzzing?
that's the sound system.
Okay.
The preliminary numbers indicated that November would look better than October, but it was too early and I had to get this document ready. So I decided to be much more conservative in what I projected for income from
My recollection is that money that was like one-time money of going from the $10 to the $5, you know, if you think about it, would not necessarily come in all in one fell swoop up front, because I would think it would come in over time, because it's only going to be relevant when someone comes in, right?
Right, but we anticipate that these are regular users who had we expected it to jump up and be repaid more quickly. Because, for instance, the people who use computers have to have a valid library card. So if they have more than $5 worth of fines,
Do you have something to add to this?
you want to come up and use the
The
microphone?
microphone here, at the end of the table here. Thank you, Denise.
Yes. We've been trying to figure out why this is happening, and Denise has been helping.
I just recently received a report from Ginny Engel that November in 2012, our internet usage statistics are the lowest they've been in the whole year.
So we think that some of those people may not be using it.
Yeah, so the people we had anticipated paying their fine so they could use the computer aren't using the computer, probably some.
That's
So that
one.
might be one of the reasons.
So,
We don't know we're speculating because
Right.
we've been trying to figure this out for the last week when I started looking at the numbers.
well, okay, let me just say that I'm now concerned that our raising the fines and fees had a chilling effect that we had not that was not the purpose and was not,
The interesting thing is that staff doesn't feel that they've gotten that many complaints.
no, but people just aren't using, do you think, okay, I guess the question is, are they not using it because they
We
would
don't
have
know.
to pay their fines off, or do we have a sense that they would be low anyway?
We don't know.
No, I think, well, after I talked to Ginny, and she does work the reference desk here at Central several times a week, and she said that she thinks it doesn't appear that it's not as busy, but she said there used to be more people waiting. Now there's not people waiting as much. People can just come in and be able to get on the computer. So our stuff is being used, but there's not waiting lines. And she said, personally, she says, oh, the people that owe money can't use it, so now the people who don't can.
Okay,
And I do think that the DVDs are coming back, for sure, they're coming back. We just had a circulation meeting, and the staff said they're not overdue hardly at all.
and that was
So that's a
what we
good
wanted.
thing.
Yes, that was
But,
what we had heard.
so we're not getting any extra revenue on that. And also, I think staff have been waiving stuff in this first, period of time to help the patrons get used to it and let them use the library and stuff, because the waves are up.
Okay, well, thank you.
And then the expenditures simply have the $40,000 for the grant in salaries and benefits, and then the suggested $75,000 adjustment in the budgeted line for legal services and supplies. So we end up, the bottom line is back at the top in the far right column. Right now, if we made these adjustments, we'd be using 88,000, almost 89,000 of fund balance. Unless we see, and it's really early to tell how much money we are going to ultimately bring in on the fines.
Going back to the legal services, is there a way to get a better gauge on what it's gonna cost. I mean, we can approve, out of the 75, if we agree to 75,000, and that's over the 40,000 that we've approved, or that's kicking it up to 40?
No, it would be in addition to the 40. It would
okay.
kick it up to 105.
So, and out of that, 27,000 is pretty much committed already to Liebert Cassidy, right?
Right.
So that would leave another 50, and the question is, what's left to be, what legal fees, what legal services do
Oh,
we
it
need
depends
for the
on-
rest of the year?
Well, you'll finish your negotiations and then they'll start again.
Right,
We don't know when they'll finish.
because they're year-round now,
Um,
kind of like football.
The other thing is in the unknown, which I would say would require us to come back and up this amount, would be the status of the PERB hearing and what happens with that, what kind of decision we get.
So just, I'm not trying to beat a, it's a terrible phrase, a dead horse, but, so we had a contract with Lieber and Cassidy for $47,500 from May through December, yet we only had budgeted 40,000?
Yeah.
How did this happen? I mean, because plus, as you say, I mean, we do use county council for other things, so, I mean, that's a huge,
Yes, and
difference.
when you realize that we spent $123,000 last year, if you looked at the end of the year, you could have told, and when I started doing that the other day and working on this and discovered we'd spent that much, I asked some of those same questions.
and so now we want to, to extend Lieber and Cassidy's, now is that a total contract? And you probably already asked this, and I wasn't paying that close enough attention.
For an additional 75.
It's an additional 75 for Liebert and Cassidy only, so we're essentially almost doubling their contract, and
Well,
why
but
do
do
we
you have
feel
to,
we
they're
need to
used,
do that?
it was based on what we spent so far this year and what we spent last year. It's just the best guess of what we might need in that budget line.
But was the PERB hearing, was that this year or last year? I can't remember.
This year.
Which fiscal year, this
So,
year?
so that's essentially over, and if they give us a negative decision,
And we have to decide what we want to do next.
right, which may be nothing, or maybe, I
Maybe
don't know.
something. We don't know. I mean.
So, but still, it doesn't seem like we should have a contract with an additional 75,000 that it's really not needed, and that I would feel more comfortable if we did it for less than that,
Sure.
because I also want to make sure that it's being monitored
Right.
before we exceed it,
Well, and
which we
also-
can't exceed it. If there's a contract, please don't pay for it.
If we're only increasing by the 75, and we would commit that to the,
To Liebert Cassidy, then we have
and nothing
for
the
county council, I know,
Right.
and
So-
I agree.
I can't agree to the
So,
75.
right, so
For Liebert Cassidy, the question is, can you agree to 75 for the budget adjustment?
for legal fees, that some of which will go to county council.
Well, I'd like to know how much we're going to do the contract with Lieber and Cassidy for.
Well, do you want to do it, I did it for 47.5, we can do it for another 50,000.
Why another 50,000? I mean,
Well, we
why
have to
should
do
we
it-
have
already
that
have to
much
pay
more?
27 of it.
Because here's
we
the thing,
need
here's the thing.
professional advice.
Here's the thing, if you increase the budget, but you don't increase the contract, then you can come back to us at a later time and say, I need to have this contract increased. But if we just increase the contract, and there's not a point where, as I said, I'm uncomfortable with the monitoring situation, so I don't want to just give a blank check and say, fine, 75,000, and have you come back to us and say, oh, we've exceeded that, now we need to go back. So I'd like in this particular case, a little
you
shorter
suggest an
leash.
amount?
Well, is there a way to tell what we need, how much this year's negotiations are
No.
going to end up costing?
No?
Okay.
And we've,
Well, I would put a figure of 40,000, and then if you need to come back and have it
Okay,
extended.
just know, I have the authority to do 40,000, you all have to do 50 and
Okay,
over.
so then it would have to be 50,000 then, for you to come back to us.
but
Why would we do it twice? I mean, if, the problem, there were two problems here, the way I see it. First of all, the amount of money for legal services was not budgeted properly at the beginning of the year. If we took a look at last year and said it cost 123, then why did we do 40 this year? Okay, it was done, it was a mistake. The second thing is, we budgeted the 40,000, and then, I won't say very quickly, but we went over it. And that was the second thing, because the monitoring wasn't done. I think what we have to do is ensure that the monitoring is done either by the law firm or by somebody in-house, so that when we get to a certain point, whatever that point is, we are within $5,000 of where the contract says we cannot exceed, and we want to let you know that. Then we have to make the decision if we want to go above it. But to come back a second time, to go, let's say, 50,000, and then come back a month from now and say, well, we need another 25, why don't we do 75, ensure that there's a good monitoring system in place, and let it work that way?
But then, Tom, we don't have any money for county council. I think if we're going to increase it by 75, we either have to increase it by more than 75, or we can't commit that entire 75 to Liebert Cassidy.
Well, I didn't know, I'm not arguing committed to Liebert Cassidy. I'm putting 75,000 into legal.
Well,
I'm
and
not saying who you should give it to.
But
You've got lawyers
are you
lined up down
willing-
the street.
Wait, but I thought we were
but-
discussing extending Liebert Cassidy's contract by
Yeah.
75.
That, I don't, is that what the?
Yeah.
We're moving away from that now.
Well, I think that we're at, you know.
Okay, so if it's at 50, if their contract's at 50, then you'd have to come back to us at 50,000 and ask for approval of that?
If it appeared that we needed 50,000, if we didn't, it would be reported to you.
Right, that's fine,
But-
that's fine. So I just would like, if we exceed the 50,000,
Right. Are you
for you to
willing
come back.
to
I'm willing
approve 75 for legal?
Yes, but not
Okay.
for
Not for
Liebert.
Liebert
Liebert
Cassidy.
Cassidy.
No, I got it.
That's
But-
okay.
But if we say a $50,000 to Liebert Cassidy,
27 of that's already spent.
27,000 of that's already
Actually,
spent.
and you don't have November and you don't have December.
I thought we did have November,
No, you don't have November. You only have, we just got the October bill.
Well, I think that,
But
I
I'm-
think
I'm
so,
comfortable
because I
doing
think
that.
it'd be important for you to, at that point, have in place your monitoring system.
Well, just keep in mind, you all don't meet again until January 28th.
Well, I would hope we wouldn't be going through the $23,000 in that short space.
Well, but
But we
it
might
may have
have
already
gone
been
through-
gone through. That's the point, because we haven't gotten the November bill yet, and there will be a December bill by that time,
Right.
right?
I'm a little
Yes,
confused.
Let me ask Jamie.
I just wanted to add to this that in November, we had 3 all-day meetings that involved Kelly's time. And in December, we have 2 all-day meetings scheduled so far for labor negotiations.
Okay. Well, and here's my suggestion at this point, so we can move things forward. Let's amend 9. What are we on? What number was that?
Well, 9.2,
9.3. Well, but we were talking, we started with the.
9.3.
9.3. Let's amend it to 50,000 and authorize our director to extend the agreement with Liebert Cassidy not to exceed an additional $50,000. When we get to authorizing the budget changes, we can put 75,000 into legal. And then in closed session, we can have a discussion about whether we want and at what level we want to continue using Liebert Cassidy for the negotiations.
I would
And-
feel more comfortable with 60,000.
I'm-
Just because we don't know October.
I'm very concerned that we're not leaving any money for county council, and although their participation, our needs for them have been lower in the past, they are our attorneys for the joint powers agreement discussions and negotiations. And I would
that's why I'm-
anticipate we're going to be using them a little more in the future, and I don't want
Well, our
to.
expenses for them on this sheet on the back were like 5,000
Right, but that's
for
for,
August, September, and
right, but that's because we were
October.
only using them for.
But I'm then saying if we did 60,000 for the contract, and that leaves another 10 15,000 for county council.
No, yeah, 15.
But it feels to me like we're already talking about the fact of exceeding the $50,000.
Right.
We don't have November.
Yeah.
We've got 5 full days
Yeah.
in December and
Two.
But,
2
but
full
I
days
think
in
we're going to
December,
discuss whether we
and we don't meet till the end of January.
want, I mean,
Okay, now I got that point, too.
we're going to discuss whether those 2 full days should be, I mean, I don't know, but I agree with Tom that that should be a closed session discussion having to do with our negotiating tactics. So my suggestion to move everything along is, I mean, are you?
55?
Do I hear?
I think it would be smarter to do 60, because I do not think, if you figure that I just paid a bill a little less than 30, or I just approved it.
Right, but that was partially for our hearing as well, right?
Right, but that
That was
money's
a
coming
lot of time.
the budget in.
Right. No, I understand that's.
Can we somehow build into this, and I don't know how it would change the motion, that an ironclad monitoring system be put in place so that we know ahead of time that if we're, within $1.50 of where we cannot exceed, that somebody knows about that.
Actually, I think the monitoring's going to have to be done on our end. They're not going to do the monitoring.
Well, can we get them to agree to send us bills in a timely fashion so we don't run up more when we're near that?
Well,
Because,
but the bill is the bill is the bill sort of thing.
well, it is, but it isn't. I mean, if they're near to it and we have 2 days scheduled in the next month and decide we don't want to do that anymore, we cancel those 2 days. Whereas if we don't know what the bill is,
And
we
it's
don't
in
have
their
that option.
interest, it's in their interest to monitor it because, usually with a contract, you don't get paid for what you exceed the contract. And so I would think that they would want to be sure that they got paid.
Except for a lawyer. He'll find a way to get paid.
Well,
But still, I mean, legally, we're
No, I
not
agree.
obligated to
I
pay
agree.
them more than.
and
Yeah.
as Susan said, it's hard for us to know because the different people they use charge, bill different
Well,
rates.
it's also, even if you just look at Kelly's time here at Labor Relations, if we ask a question about FLSA, or if there's another question about something else, then we end up using more additional time that's not labor relations.
So really, though, they don't
So-
have like an account? I mean, everybody has to keep track of their billings.
They do, they
for-
turn it in at the end of the month.
You should be able to call Liebert
And
Cassidy
say
at
how-
any time
what's
and
on my
say, can you
account?"
please tell me what the outstanding balance on our bill is?
Yes, you
Any
should be
law
able to.
service would be able to do that.
Well, yes, but, okay.
I'm,
won't.
I'm,
But they turn their hours, their billing hours in at the end of the month, so they don't know how much time Kelly spent on something until the end of the month.
Well, maybe she should tell them weekly, If she's doing it weekly, she should be telling them
Well,
I
weekly.
will work on this and find out a way to take care of it.
Are we now talking about $10,000, 50 or 60? Is that where we
Yeah.
are? Okay.
I think
wait.
so.
Do we have a,
Do we have a consensus?
55?
this is on the Liebert Cassidy amount. We've
Just-
not gotten
right.
into the second
I
part
think
of this.
there was a consensus that we would fund the
Legal.
up at 75,000.
Okay.
And the question is, how much of that 75 did we want to commit to Liebert Cassidy?
Okay.
Is that correct where we
Yes.
are? Okay. So the numbers on the table right now are 55 and 60.
I think it would be, it needs to be 60.
Okay.
I'm okay, yeah,
Yeah.
for $5,000.
Let's, got to get it done.
All right. So let's amend the 9.3, to approve the extension of the agreement. Do I hear a motion to authorize the library director to execute an extension of the agreement with Liebert Cassidy Whitmore in the amount of $60,000 with the understanding that there will be a monitoring system put into place that is an actual monitoring system?
Not a faux monitoring system.
not a phone monitoring system. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay. Is there further discussion of the commission? Public comment?
Yes.
Yes. And they got the mic. Very good.
There are so many discrepancies and inconsistencies in the proposal that you were given that it was really hard to tease out what points to make. So I'm going to start with several different things that are upsetting to members of the public, and I speak now as a taxpayer. The director earns approximately $150,000 a year, and the HR director earns approximately $90,000 a year. That's $240,000 a year for the two combined. Before Cooper's tenure, those two positions handled the negotiations with the union. There was no need to hire Liebert Cassidy for an additional $115,000 for the course of the year to take care of our labor negotiation needs. That's point one. Point two, in the papers that you were given, the director cited 3 different time frames for this proposal: a May to December agreement, expenditures from July to November, and then on an attachment, expenditures from August to November. The dates don't line up, and therefore the figures don't line up. And as a member of the public trying to understand what's going on with the finances at the library, it again looks quite impenetrable. Documents and attachments such as these provoke questions about how such documents are prepared and why they are so incoherent. It contributes consistently to my and other people's lack of confidence in library accounting and budgeting practices, and that's before the conversation that took place in front of us about how we exceeded a not-to-exceed contract and nobody was monitoring it. That's incredible to me in light of a conversation from your auditor saying, if you don't start paying this massive amount of money immediately, which nobody at the moment can say where it's going to come from, that is going to take place at the same time that you are going to agree to again up the ante and give Sandy Cooper an...
Yes, yes, we do. Thank you. Is that?
That's where
buzzing?
buzzing's coming from.
Thank you. Are there any additional public comments? Okay. And in light of those comments, was there any additional discussion by the commission? All right. I don't disagree with everything that was said.
Nor do I.
Do I hear a vote? All those in favor of authorizing as recommended? Not as recommended, authorizing as amended? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
Now we go to,
Do you want to go to the,
let's go to the open source,
yeah,
and then we'll go back to the,
right.
okay, you want to give us the highlights on this one first?
Well, this would be a new funding source to allow us to continue to work on fulfillment and Evergreen through June 30th. It allows us to pilot fulfillment with some of the libraries across the hill in Napa and possibly in Solano. The money comes from the NorthNet library system.
Do we pay into that? NorthNet?
Yes, we do, but this money is state money that goes to the system.
And are we going to be making any financial contribution, or if this pilot is successful, is it going to end up costing us?
We don't know because it depends on what recommendations we have coming out of the pilot. But one of the reasons we're doing the pilot, there are two issues here. There's finding a tool to replace SuperSearch, which right now is still, although we're using a new tool, an interim tool, still taking a lot of staff time. The second piece is that Evergreen is an open source system that actually could end up saving us money if we decide that it could meet our needs, and we could go from Horizon to an open source system.
Okay. And is this pilot going to cost us anything?
No.
Okay.
Except staff time, right?
Right, but it's helping support one of our goals. It's one of the things we've got in Focus and Finish this year. And it's paying for the bulk of the staff time.
And we can walk away if we don't like the pilot, if it doesn't work out, if it's not the way we just walk away.
We have no,
All right.
that's why we're doing a pilot.
And this has been negotiated with the union to have the person that we're using here?
He's now on staff. We'll have, it's a meet and confer issue, right?
It's a meet and confer?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. And the person who we have on staff, is he an independent contractor?
No.
Or- So we're paying benefits?
Yes, because he was a full-time employee.
Okay.
And
so-
we've gotten enough money to cover his benefits in the grant.
Okay. And then when the contract is, or when the grant is over, he will go back to being a full-time employee?
He'll go back to his former position.
Okay,
He's a full-time employee now.
got it.
Because one of the things we had to negotiate with the union is not have him be a contract worker, but have him be using existing FTE.
Okay.
When does the end?
June 30th.
Okay, is that on here then?
Sandy, is there any reason not to do this?
No, not that I know of.
So the pilot ends June 30th, and the funding takes us to June 30th.
That's correct. And you're right, it's not on here explicitly.
Okay. And this was the pilot that we authorized the first 15,000 back in June?
Right.
And how's it going so far?
It's been progressing. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to say anything about it?
Well, there have been updates and we focus on
Right.
reports each month,
Okay.
new information about what's happening that month.
Okay. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Any further discussion by the commission? Public comment? Okay. All in favor of authorizing the director to accept the grant from North Net Library System?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So then we come to 9.1. Wait, 9.2, sorry. We already did one, right. 9.2. And did you already hit all the highlights previously? Or is there more you wanted to focus us on?
I'll be glad to answer any questions.
I have a question, and I'm not sure exactly how to state this. But in terms of the use of the 88,000, I mean, in order to do this budget adjustment, we're having to use the fund balance for 88,000.
We're having to use 88,000 of the fund balance.
Right.
Yes, that's correct.
Right. And that is partly based, that figure is related to the charge for services, the projected 60,000, and that may be more, correct?
I'm not sure what you're asking. The charge for services is what we're suggesting we project as additional revenue for fines and fees.
Right, and that you were saying was that was a conservative reevaluation of a conservative amount.
Based on 6 weeks' worth of information.
Right. So it is feasible that we might, I mean, it's possible that there might be more coming in from that.
Right.
And then would that money, that would require less coming out of the fund balance?
That's correct.
Okay. So it's up to 88,000 from the fund balance.
Right, but right now with the budget you have, it's a projected 88,000. Assuming that we can keep everything else within the budget.
Are there other places to look if we didn't want to authorize using the fund balance?
I have not had an opportunity to go through the existing budget with a fine-tooth comb. That's normally something I would do with the library management team.
I'm very reluctant to authorize use of the fund balance at this point, especially with the audit we just had.
Well, but maybe.
But we have no choice, I mean.
Yeah, what's the alternative?
We've already
I
done
don't
the
know.
other things, but.
Well, I guess the alternative is to look if there's any other places to cut.
Well, let me just say that we can certainly look at controlling expenditures elsewhere, but any adjustments to the budget need to be approved tonight so they can go to the Board of Supervisors for the in time for the consolidated budget adjustments.
Because our
What's the deadline
original-
on that?
Sometime in early January.
Because our original budget had using 526,000 from the fund balance, right? That's what we had originally approved.
Right.
Before negotiation.
Right, but that was a placeholder budget. That was never, we were never going to use $526,000 from the fund balance.
You can, you have some choices. You can not approve this, and we can wait and see, and we can have a separate budget adjustment go through, not as part of the consolidated budget adjustments, I think. I'm not sure. Or we can just leave the budget like it is until April and make the adjustments.
But we have to move the money into the legal.
Well, technically you don't right now because technically the county only looks at the character level and not at the sub-object level.
Okay, what
What
is
does
that
that
in
mean?
English?
Well, you know, the characters are salaries and benefits, and then you have all these sub-objects under them. All they look at is the bottom line for that character, salaries and benefits. And the only time then that there are any problems is if there's not enough money appropriated in the bottom line under salary. Same thing under services and supplies. The breakdown of all the sub-objects that we have, if you look at, I'm trying to look at the budget reports in document 10.1.4. Look at expenditures. It's document 10.1.4, your budget, your year-to-date. The whole section, vacancy factor, planned salary savings, permanent positions, blah, 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 down through workers' compensation. Those are all sub-objects that are part of the character salaries and benefits. Then from there down to, through sub-object 7400 are all part of the character services and supplies. So from the county's perspective, all they're worried about is that we have enough money appropriated at the character level to cover our expenditures. Does that help?
Yeah, for me too.
So,
So one of the options is to,
punt, kick the can
Leave it
down the
alone.
road.
Well,
Leave it alone. Just
Leave it
don't
alone
do
for
anything.
now, and then we can, we'll have more information when we have had a little more time of the fines and fees.
well, I guess I'm going to be difficult. I'm not comfortable just leaving it alone. Can we leave it alone for tonight with the understanding that we're going to be looking for other places? Because let's assume that your projections are accurate, then we have to find $88,000 somewhere if we don't
Right.
want to use the fund balance.
Right.
So leave it alone now with the understanding that you're going to be going
That we'll
over,
look at
management's going to be
where-
looking for.
There are some places we might save that much.
That would be my preference at this
Sure.
point. But the rest of the commission may not feel that way.
Yeah, and I also think we need to reopen the conversation about the unfunded liability that we were talking about with our auditor earlier.
Right.
And
I think that's going to require quite a bit of discussion, and Will suggested some ideas about how to get there.
And I think that's something that we will be doing in February at the budget hearings, I think.
February and March.
February, March for the next upcoming year's budget. I suspect that's going to be a big
Well,
consideration.
and my experience has been that essentially we rarely give direction before that proposed budget is given to us in February.
Right.
Our operations in the past have been that we are presented with a proposed budget, and that then we have the February and March meetings to deal with it. But I'm kind of encouraging that this time, maybe in January, we are able to say, please take into account the unfounded,
I think that you need to remember what Will said is the first thing you have to do is come up with a plan. You are not going to be in a position to deal with this in this budget. You're going to have to examine and evaluate what your options are for beginning to take care of that liability and look at them all and then decide how you plan to deal with it. It's not something that you're going to be in a position to do just as part of the budgetary process for 13-14.
I understand that, but I'm also saying that we are saying something, you're hearing, I think, very clearly, but it would be nice if there were a way to say, as you are making working to present us with a preliminary budget, we need to have you relook at the allocation for legal fees. We need to, there are some elements that perhaps we want to give some direction before the preliminary budget.
Well, let me just say that we can certainly do the best we can, but that will be lucky. I'm not even sure who's going to be preparing the budget documents at this point.
I understand that.
And it's certainly not going to be anybody who has enough familiarity. It's going to take, I guess the way I'm feeling right now is we're going to be lucky if we can get you sort of the basics based on patterns in the past, that we don't have anybody to do the kind of analysis and work that needs to be done to get you ready to deal with your OPEB liability between now and even the middle of February.
is that something Will would potentially be able to talk to us about
maybe-
options?
I think he said pretty clearly today that he suggested that we go elsewhere to find, and he said that to me before, because I've talked to them. I raised that with Elisa and Will several meetings ago that we had.
And it might be worth us discussing that for the February workshop we have, or for the March workshop, for one of the budget workshops, on the agenda is planning for what we're going to do with the
think-
OPEB, to come up with a game plan.
Well, I think that probably what I would suggest you do is let me see if David Sundstrom can come and talk about ways that government agencies are dealing with this
Right.
liability. So you begin to see what the options
right?
are and
That's
the
what
pros
we
and
need to start
cons.
coming up with a plan, but we can't do that just sort of in the dark, so we need.
And there's some other ideas that Will has about ways to get us the assistance we need to do this, but it's not going to happen by February.
No.
But
Okay. Well, so I guess the question is,
Just table it.
do we want to just table the mid-year adjustment at this point? Yes, that's okay. Here's my agenda, here we go. Okay, so then we would be, public comment? Did anybody want to comment on our tabling of the mid-year adjustment? Okay. So then we would be up to the management report, 10.1.
Did you want to talk about any highlights from the management
No,
report?
I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, I would, my question is, what's the process and timeline for replacing Alicia?
Well, I think based on my conversations with Will and the issues that need to be dealt with, what we're probably going to have to do is get an interim temporary person in there to run that office. While Jamie will be supervising facilities for the time being, and we'll be working with Patrick on HR. Over the long haul, we need a very thorough and careful search to find the person who has the qualities that we need. Will has been very clear about some of the things we need to look for in that position. So, and one of the issues that Patrick has suggested, and I think we may need to look at, is using a headhunter firm, a recruitment firm, to help us identify likely candidates. Since this is not your normal library position recruitment.
Okay, and would an interim person be from within the organization?
No, there's
one
nobody
outside?
in the
Okay.
organization that can do it. In fact, that was one of the things that he was particularly concerned about, that Will was that we get somebody from outside in as quickly as possible to
And so-
supervise that budget and finance office.
What's the process for getting an interim person?
Well, I've got 2 things I'm working on. I'm trying to set up a call with Betsy House at the county accounting to see if she knows of somebody who's retired that might be able to do it or something like that. And then the other option is to look at one of the manpower, the firms like Nelson that supplies people like that.
Okay. And hopefully it won't take until our next meeting for you to sort out something?
For the temporary.
For the temporary, that's what I mean.
I hope so.
Okay. Any other questions on the management, or any comments or discussion?
Yeah, I'm not going to mention the Petaluma return again this time.
Been here this last week.
I know, I'm not going to go there. I was really neat on page, oh dear, what page number are we? Anyway, 1.8.2, I have a little yay saying the staff links are in all the branches. Yay, I'm glad that that's done. I think I want to talk just a minute about 1.2.2, which is the monitor workload using standard workload measures. I think that one of the things that was clear in the report on the hours was that this is crucial, the idea of how to effectively use our staff at the various branches. That's what this is, right?
It's more making sure that the resources we have are properly deployed so that you don't have, for instance, Rincon Valley, which has a workload that is much higher than some of the other branches. So it's a smoothing out of workload.
Right, and I'm glad to see continuing to consider options, but this feels like something that I hope comes to some conclusion, because I am concerned about
Well, I am concerned particularly about Rincon.
Okay. And they had the election, when do we hear from Multnomah?
We have some preliminary information from Multnomah, but it doesn't answer the questions. Rebecca's working on that.
Okay.
So Tim, is it 1.2.1, the substitute thing that you're thinking of?
No, I'm at 1.2.2, which is the, I mean, this is a significant issue, I understand that. It's the allocation of resources across the branches, and if the library services are changing, the needs of the different branches are changing, and we have that report on the shortened hours showed that we have a staff that's really stretched, and is there a way through 1.2.2 to help alleviate some of that?
Actually, I just want to be clear that it's only going to help in the most extreme cases.
I understand.
Okay, I don't want to create any unrealistic expectations. What we're trying to do is say, is there one, or are there branches that are very out of range in terms of the workload? And if so, what can we do about it?
Okay. And I had another question on the work, what do we call these, the work plans and so forth. The thing that popped out.
Are you jumping to another document?
Document 10.1.3, can I go to that? Or?
It should be, Jim, why don't we move through them?
Okay, I'll wait till then.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I had to ask.
I just wanted to say I appreciate that the safety training. It's hard to get staff to want to go to the training, so I appreciate your efforts.
How are the phone systems going? I've heard it's adding stress to a few places that.
Well, I think that what we have discovered is the problem was not the phone system itself, but our network infrastructure. And so steps are being taken to take care of that.
Okay.
So I think it's,
We're closing in on it?
yes, I think we are.
Or what?
Closing in on it.
Some of it, I think you have to remember, some portion of it is an adjustment to a system that's different from the one that we've had.
Right.
But there are some network infrastructure problems that were brought to light by this.
Okay. Thank you. Any additional commission discussion or comments? All
On
right.
which documents?
Oh, I'm sorry, on 10.1, management report, the entire
Well,
thing.
oh, because Tim had, you haven't even looked at the year-to-dates, and Tim had a question
Okay.
about the 10.1.3.
Okay.
My only question is, in terms of our understanding this document, the first name in the manager and supervisor is Alyssa, and she was responsible for 6 performance reviews. And I think we can assume that either you're going to be doing those, or we're just going to...
She, actually, she has 6 employees that she did work plans for, so she did finish those before she left.
Okay.
So we actually have work plans for those.
Those all came in after the date of this report.
Right.
Okay. Because I just saw more stuff on your desk and I was worried.
And actually, there are like 14 documents that came in after this report.
Oh,
See, we cut off all of this in an attempt to get these things out. Everything's just through the 20th of the month. And I don't know if anybody had questions about the year-to-date financials.
Are there questions about the year-to-date financials? No? Okay, let me then open for the public comment, 10.1, discussion item 10.1, which is management reports. Any public comment? Okay, let's go on to the 10.2, review of the video recording. I have to confess to not quite understanding what the option packages were. Which package in here would let you search, which I think was the original impetus for this report?
Let's see, Rebecca, help me with this. I had it figured out the other day. You'd have to go with the open platform and they use all sorts of weird
Right.
wording.
But I guess the question is,
The meeting efficiency,
Sweet, do we need that to be able to search?
yeah, it has to be indexed.
And that was the only one?
Well, that and the open platform, I believe, we asked the county, I believe you asked for information about which components the county uses, and which were those? I'm sorry?
It is the meeting efficiency suite.
Okay. That, and you'd have to get the open platform suite.
Okay, well, if I understood correctly, you need the open platform suite for everything.
Right.
That's your foundation.
Right.
And then you can add to it, and it seemed to me like, from when I was reading these things, I was thinking this is just way more than we need. I'm not sure we need.
Well, this was simply it was in response to the query last time about what would it take to index it. And this is essentially what it would take
What it would take would be the meeting efficiency suite?
with the open platform, yes.
So if I understand it, it would be, this is the smallest type I've ever seen.
Yes.
I think $6,000 in upfront cost, and
Right.
then it looks like about, I literally can't read it,
Be the-
1,100 on a monthly basis?
No, I think you have to add that monthly $299, so it looks to me like it's about $1,500 a month after you do your upfront. Is that, Sandy,
Yeah.
about right?
Okay,
That's
so
what
we're
I
talking
think.
$20,000?
That's crazy.
Sorry, I don't think it's worth it.
What kind of feedback, if any, have we had about the change in the minutes using the video recording?
Have you gotten any? I haven't. The only feedback I can give you is it makes Rebecca and me happy.
Okay, wait a minute, why can't the government the government transparency suite says index video in real time and link to relevant materials, so is that not, that one's 2,500 up front plus roughly 1,000 a month,
Yeah.
600 plus the 300. Would that not let people search a video?
Could we ask you to maybe clarify with the vendor, what would be the least expensive option if all we're really after is being able to index and not needing all the other bells and whistles, and just see, maybe there's a pared down version we can get or something?
Okay. Yeah, I don't think anybody wants to spend 20,000 on videotape minute. Okay. Public comment? All right, we would be moving into closed session
In the boardroom.
in the boardroom. And then, do we have any, well, wait, did we have any appointments for?
No.
Nothing, okay. So the next meeting is January 28th.